Hi guys, tonight we are heading into a winter so cold it freezes not just the rivers but your eyelashes too. Imagine stepping out of your door and feeling your breath turn instantly into ice crystals that sting your face. The dawn is a bluish haze, and the air is still as stone, a silence so deep it almost presses on your ears. You tug your cloak closer, but it feels like wrapping yourself in paper against the teeth of the wind. Snow has piled against the thatch of your roof, so heavy you half expect it to cave in, and the path to the well is just a white blur. You probably won't survive this, but let's pretend you do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights, and we'll walk together into the frozen world of the harshest winters of the Middle Ages. You trudge through the drifts, every step a crunch that echoes as if the whole world is hollow glass. This isn't a modern storm that lasts a few inconvenient days. This is a season that sinks its claws in and doesn't let go, stretching for months where food dwindles, wood piles shrink, and life feels like a coin flip between survival and silence. Historical records tell us that in years like 1315, when the Great Famine began, rain and cold destroyed harvests across Europe. Grain rotted in the fields, and the cold meant nothing could be saved. Whole villages stared at empty barns while snow still fell from grey skies. But it's not just famine that bites you, it's the smaller cruelties. Your fingertips turn red, then numb, then waxy pale. People wrap them in cloth and mutter charms, because there's no neat medical term for frostbite here. One quirky detail from monastic accounts. Some households stuffed their boots with warm pigeon feathers, believing birds carried a hidden spark of life that kept toes from freezing off. It's half superstition, half clever insulation, and you cling to both. The silence of a frozen morning is deceptive too. Listen closely, and you'll hear the crack of branches splitting under ice, or the groan of distant timbers as roofs sag. Dogs bark at nothing, unsettled by the strangeness of sound carrying differently in this air. Even voices feel muffled, as though words are caught and frozen before they reach anyone's ears. You find yourself whispering without knowing why, as though the cold itself might shatter if you speak too loud. Historians still debate whether these brutal winters were isolated disasters or part of a broader climate pattern beginning what we now call the Little Ice Age. Some argue it was volcanic eruptions blotting the sun. Others point to shifts in ocean currents. At the time, though, no one thinks of science. People simply assume heaven is angry, or perhaps demons are having their fun. For you, trudging through drifts, it doesn't matter which is true. All that matters is surviving to see green again. Even inside the hut, safety isn't guaranteed. Smoke gathers in the rafters as families huddle around a fire that barely warms their knees while their backs remain cold as stone. The smell of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and mouldy straw lingers, mixing with the tang of wood smoke so strong it burns your eyes. You lie awake at night, listening to the wind claw at the shutters, half expecting them to splinter, and when you finally drift off, you dream of warmth only to wake with frost on your blanket. And yet, against the odds, life goes on. Chickens scratch feebly in the corners, children chase each other with little puffs of steam for laughter, and you still walk to church, bells clanging faintly in the icy air. There's resilience here, hidden in the smallest acts. People mend boots with scraps of leather, mix flour with powdered acorns when grain is gone, and share thin soup with neighbors because starvation is easier to face together than alone. Think of it. This is only the first dawn of many. And still, you put one foot in front of the other, crunching through the white silence, because hope, even if it's only for the faintest hint of spring, is enough to keep you moving. You stoop down, ducking beneath the low roof beam of a peasant's hut, the doorway rimed with frost where breath has condensed over weeks. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Smoke so thick it scratches the back of your throat, a wet smell of straw and damp wool, and beneath that the faint ammonia tang of livestock penned in at one end. In the heart of winter, People bring their animals inside, not out of kindness but necessity. The heat from their bodies is the closest thing to central heating you'll get in the 13th century. Imagine drifting off to sleep with a cow breathing heavily a few feet away, its ribs showing from lack of fodder, its breath clouding in the same icy air you're trying to escape. The hut is dark even in daytime. One tiny window, more a hole than a pane, lets in a pale smear of light, but it's covered with oiled cloth or horn to keep out drafts. You sit on a bench near the hearth, but the fire is no roaring blaze. Wood is scarce in the dead of winter. Every branch has already been gathered, every hedge stripped. What you get now is damp brushwood or peat that smoulders more than it burns. The smoke curls along the rafters, settling as black soot, and you rub your eyes until they water. This is warmth, medieval style, barely enough to thaw your fingertips, not nearly enough to forget that the outside world is colder than you can bear. Archaeological digs in northern Europe have shown just how tiny these huts were, sometimes no bigger than a modern living room, and sheltering a whole family with their animals. One mainstream fact worth remembering is that most medieval peasants lived in single-room dwellings until well into the later Middle Ages. No privacy, no insulation beyond wattle and daub walls and thatch roofs. If the wind howled from the wrong direction, snow might sift in through the roof itself, dusting your bedding. But it wasn't only about construction, it was about improvisation. Families stuffed straw into cracks in the walls, laid bracken under sleeping mats, and wrapped themselves in every scrap of cloth available. A quirky detail that comes from a few village records. Some households spread manure against the outer walls as an insulating layer. It sounds revolting to modern ears, but packed frozen dung formed a surprisingly effective barrier against the biting winds. You picture yourself smoothing muck along the hut wall with numb hands, gagging at the smell, but grateful for the difference it makes. You sit cross-legged by the hearth, sipping from a clay cup of thin broth. It tastes mostly of water and cabbage, maybe thickened with barley if you're lucky. The broth scalds your lips, but you're thankful it's the only time today you'll feel warmth reach inside you. Outside, the snow muffles everything, but you can hear distant chopping. Someone found a tree limb to hack apart, the sound carrying oddly through the frozen air. Every stroke is survival measured in seconds of fire. Even so, wood supplies never last. Families resorted to burning dung patties, dried over months, to keep the embers alive. The smell is unforgettable, sharp, acrid, filling every corner of the hut until it seeps into your clothing. You can almost taste it when you lick your lips, yet you cling to the fire as if it's a living companion. Without it, you know you wouldn't last long. You look around the hut, noticing the people. A grandmother crooks her hands around her knees, fingers swollen with chilblains, whispering prayers against the cold. Children nestle under sheepskins, not speaking, conserving energy. Their cheeks are hollow, their eyes too large for their faces. Every cough makes the room tense, because illness spreads faster when bodies are weakened by hunger. You feel the weight of silence, everyone waiting for spring, everyone wondering if they'll see it. And yet, there are moments of strange comfort. Someone produces a scrap of dried apple from autumn stores. The sweetness bursts on your tongue like a memory of summer, sharp and almost painful in its reminder of warmth. For a few seconds, you smile. It's in these tiny tastes and fleeting joys that survival is stitched together. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were harsher than those of antiquity, or simply felt worse due to social conditions. Some climate researchers suggest that the Little Ice Age began gradually in the late Middle Ages, tipping weather patterns toward colder, wetter seasons. Others believe the hardship came less from the cold itself, and more from fragile agricultural systems collapsing under pressure. To you, sitting in a smoky hut with your stomach growling, the cause hardly matters. Cold is cold, and the fear is real. Picture yourself lying down to sleep. Your bedding is a pile of straw covered with a rough blanket. It crackles beneath you, and little bits stick in your hair. You pull your cloak over your body, but the draft at your back is relentless. You tuck your feet into a sack of straw to stop them from going numb, and you curl tight. nose tucked into your hands. Sleep doesn't come easily when the wind rattles the door and the smoke stings your eyes, but eventually exhaustion drags you under. You dream of summer fields, of warm bread, of rivers that don't groan with ice. Then morning comes, grey and merciless. You wake to frost crusting your blanket, your breath clouding in front of you. Someone stirs the embers, coaxing them into flame, and the day begins again. The rhythm is endless. Gather fuel, ration food, tend animals, pray for warmth, and all the while, the hut crouches under its snowy roof like a tired beast, holding you within its fragile ribs. Despite everything, these huts were not simply prisons of misery. They were cocoons of survival. Within them, families told stories, sang songs, and marked feast days even when the cupboards were bare. The crackle of the fire was background music to human resilience. You realize that the walls may be thin, but the bonds inside are thick with necessity. In a way, you are warmer for being together, even if the temperature says otherwise. And outside? The snow lies heavy on the thatch, creaking as it settles, while smoke snakes from the chimney into a sky so pale it seems drained of color. A crow caws somewhere in the distance, a harsh note in the muffled silence. You step back out into it, pulling your cloak tight, your body already aching for the hut's meager warmth. But you carry with you the smell of smoke and dung, the memory of cabbage broth, the sound of a child's soft breathing in the night. This is the heart of medieval winter, a small room, a fragile fire, and a stubborn refusal to let the cold win. You stagger along a path that doesn't really look like a path anymore, just churned snow where dozens of feet have trudged before you. Your stomach cramps, not from sickness but from emptiness that gnaws deeper than the cold. The winters of famine were merciless. Take the early 14th century. For example, the Great Famine that began in 1315, when relentless rains drowned fields and cold weather ruined harvests for 3 long years. Grain failed, hay rotted, and livestock wasted away in muddy pastures. In villages across Europe, people didn't just fear hunger, they lived with it every single hour, a dull ache that colored everything else grey. You glance at your hand clutching a crust of bread, so hard it could break a tooth. This might be your entire meal for the day. Bread had always been the staff of life. But now, with crops ruined, even the poorest loaves were stretched with ground-up acorns or pea flour. They filled the belly, but they offered little nourishment. You chew slowly, hoping to trick yourself into fullness. Around you, others gnaw just as desperately, eyes hollow, cheeks drawn. You know that many will not see the thaw. The famine winters did not just starve people, they starved communities. Villages, once bustling with laughter and gossip, fell silent. Fields stood bare, tilled soil wasted as black muck under frost. Markets collapsed because there was nothing left to sell. Imagine walking through a town square once lively with bread stalls and butchers, now nothing but shuttered booths and desperate beggars. Hunger became the background noise of life. One historical fact worth noting is that the famine winters between 1315 and 1317 killed somewhere between 10 and 15% of the population in parts of northern Europe. That's not just a statistic, that's nearly 1 in every 10 people you pass on this road, simply gone by spring. Think of your neighbors, your family, the old woman who used to sing while milking her cow. Odds are, some will not live to hear birdsong again. A quirky tidbit appears in some records. When bread truly ran out, people brewed famine beer from whatever could be scrounged: nettles, oats, even tree bark. The taste must have been wretched, a bitter liquid closer to medicine than ale, but desperate throats swallowed it gratefully. You can almost smell it, sour and earthy, as though the forest itself had been boiled and strained into a cup. As hunger deepened, choices grew darker. You overhear whispers in the village about stealing grain from monasteries, about raiding storehouses guarded by armed men. Others mutter about eating the seed grain, meant for spring planting, knowing it means starvation will stretch into the next year. Some chronicles, grim ones, mention cannibalism in the hardest-hit areas. Whether exaggerated or not, the fact that such rumors spread at all shows how fragile the line of survival became. And yet, you also find moments of generosity, families sharing a crust, neighbors leaving a turnip on someone else's doorstep, monks opening their doors to feed a few mouths with thin porridge. Humanity flickered dimly but stubbornly, even in famine. You push forward along the snowy track, hearing your stomach growl, wondering how long a body can endure like this. Children cry at night with that thin, keening wail of hunger that no rocking can soothe. Mothers hush them, pressing them close, hoping warmth will dull the ache. Men grow gaunt, faces sharpened into angles, hands trembling from weakness when they swing an axe. Daily life becomes a cycle of rationing and praying. Historians still discuss whether the Great Famine was entirely caused by weather shifts or compounded by political mismanagement. Some point to heavy taxation and ongoing wars that stripped peasants of reserves they might have survived on. Others argue it was nature alone, a once-in-a-century run of bad weather tipping the balance. You, trudging along in snow with a piece of bark bread in your mouth, don't have the luxury of debate. All you know is the sky hasn't cleared for weeks, and the fields look like graveyards. You huddle with others in the smoky hall of the village. Someone ladles out a watery stew made of parsnips and turnips, roots wrinkled and stringy from poor storage. You spoon it into your mouth anyway, because it is warm and fills the hollow inside, if only for a moment. The room smells of boiled earth, sweat and despair, but also of something stubborn people still gathering, still talking, still trying to live. A song rises, halting at first, then stronger, voices weaving together as though melody itself could feed the spirit. Night falls quickly in famine winters. With bellies half empty, bodies thin, the cold seeps in faster. Families crawl onto beds of straw, pulling ragged blankets tight. The hunger doesn't let you sleep deeply. You wake often, mouth dry, stomach cramping. In dreams you see tables spread with roast meats and bread loaves golden with butter, only to wake and find your hand clenched on nothing. And yet, even here, survival strategies evolve. Some peasants gather edible weeds under the snow, learning which roots won't poison them. Others dry nettle leaves, grind them, and mix them into flour. A few hunt for squirrels or birds, anything that might land in the pot. There's ingenuity in desperation, though it never feels like enough. In the morning, frost glitters on every thatched roof, beautiful if you forget for a moment how deadly it is. Children scrape ice from buckets, their fingers red and raw. Men limp into the woods, hoping to scare a hare from its burrow. Women stretch dough as thin as parchment to make it last. Every gesture is survival, played out against a backdrop of white silence. And you, your stomach aching, your breath a ghost in the air, wonder how many more mornings like this can pass before spring finally breaks the famine's grip. You know not everyone will last. But for now, you take another bite of hard bread, chew slowly, and keep walking, because there is no other choice. You shuffle toward the hearth, clutching your hands to your chest, and glance down at your feet. They've gone the color of old candle wax, mottled with patches of angry red. The pain is sharp, then oddly absent, like someone has stolen the nerves away. Frostbite, though you don't have that word. You only know the sight of neighbors losing toes, the whispered stories of fingers blackening until they fall away. You reach for strips of rag, winding them clumsily, trying to trap some heat against skin that feels like stone. A neighbor leans over, muttering advice that sounds more like ritual than medicine. Garlic poultices, he says, pressed against the flesh. Another swears by smearing goose fat, claiming the animal's warmth lingers in the oil. Someone else ties charms, little bits of bone and cloth around wrists and ankles to keep frost demons from chewing away at the flesh. These aren't doctors, of course. Learned men write in Latin far from here, in monasteries and universities. But what good is theory when you're watching your toes turn black in a hut where the fire dies nightly? One mainstream fact survives from written accounts. Frostbite was common in medieval Europe during harsh winters, and amputations, however crude, were not unusual. Without antiseptics, even small wounds could fester. Yet surprisingly, many people lived on, maimed but alive, hobbling through fields come spring. Resilience wasn't optional, it was the only option. You unwrap your cloths to look again. The sight makes you wince, but you keep working. The room smells of damp straw and smoke, but under it there's the sour, metallic tang of infection. You've seen men lose limbs not from the cold itself, but from the rot that followed. Families kept knives sharp not just for meat, but for emergencies no one wanted to name aloud. And then there are the remedies, so strange they almost make you laugh if laughter didn't shake your ribs in the cold. One quirky tale recorded in a healer's notes tells of people pressing chopped onions into frostbitten wounds, believing the pungent bite would scare out the cold spirits. Another swears by warm urine baths for hands and feet, heat being heat no matter how unglamorous. Imagine the smell, the steam, the grim determination of someone who will try anything rather than watch their fingers drop off. As you sit by the hearth, you hear coughing. The cold doesn't just numb flesh, it weakens lungs, saps strength. A boy curls in the corner, a rattle in his chest. You recognize it for what it is. Sickness spreading in bodies already worn thin by hunger. Chilblains, frostbite, coughs, fevers, they come bundled together like cruel companions. You shift uncomfortably, pulling your cloak tighter, as though cloth alone could protect you. Historians still debate whether these ailments shaped medieval medicine's reliance on superstition, or if superstition simply filled the void left by scarce knowledge. Some argue that the desperate experiments of common folk like packing wounds with herbs formed the roots of herbal medicine. Others claim these efforts were more prayer than science, luck occasionally disguising itself as healing. To you, sitting on a bench with feet swaddled in rags, it doesn't matter. You'll try anything that promises even a sliver of relief. You imagine trudging outside again, toes throbbing, breath catching in your chest. The snow crunches beneath you, but it's muffled, as though the world itself is half asleep. Your body feels heavier, slower, but you press on. If you stop moving, you know you'll stiffen like the travelers found by the roadside, curled as if asleep, but frozen into statues by the dawn. Inside huts, the remedies multiply. Some hang charms of iron above doors, claiming the metal bites the frost back. Others sprinkle salt in corners, drawing protective circles. Children are told to sleep with dogs for warmth, fur pressed against bare skin, both human and animal depending on each other. And yet, despite the strangeness, these customs weave a net of comfort. You begin to believe that maybe garlic poultices or onion packs do something, if only because belief itself warms the soul. But you cannot ignore the evidence of your body. Your fingertips tingle with the pins and needles ache of thawing, then dull into nothing. You know, deep down, that numbness is no blessing, it's the herald of loss. The thought creeps in, what happens if you cannot walk come spring, if you cannot work the fields? Survival is already balanced on the knife's edge. To be crippled by the cold might tip you off it entirely. Yet life carries on. You limp through chores, feeding animals, breaking ice in buckets, fetching wood. Every task hurts, but every task keeps you alive. The hut rings with ordinary sounds, the scrape of a knife, the hiss of boiling water, the low murmur of prayer. Against the backdrop of pain, daily life somehow refuses to end. Sometimes, in rare moments, you catch a glimpse of something almost beautiful. Frost patterns lace the window cloth, intricate as lacework. Icicles hang from eaves like crystal daggers, catching what little light there is. Snowflakes drift in slow spirals, settling on cloaks and lashes before melting. For a heartbeat, the world doesn't feel cruel, just strangely still. Then your toes throb again, dragging you back into the ache of reality. Night falls, and you prepare for bed. The rags on your feet stay wrapped tight, stuffed into straw sacks for warmth. You lie awake, staring at the dark rafters, listening to the wind rattle. Somewhere, wolves howl, distant but closer than you'd like. You pull the blanket over your head, as though hiding from the sound could keep it away. In the darkness, your toes ache, burn, then fade. You whisper a prayer you're not sure anyone hears. When dawn comes, grey and thin, you check your feet again. Their worse skin blistered, turning darker. You sigh, shoulders sagging, but you get up anyway. Work waits. Life doesn't pause for injury. You stagger toward the door, boots stuffed with straw, rags tied tight, heart heavier than your body. You step into the snow again, and the cycle repeats. Survival isn't about comfort anymore. It's about stubbornness. And as you limp down the track, you realize something strange. Pain has become your companion. It reminds you you're still alive, still moving, still capable of one more day. In a winter this harsh, that might be the closest thing to hope. You stand at the edge of the river, staring at something that should never happen in nature. The water, usually fast and dark and restless, is locked solid under a crust of ice so thick you could march an ox cart across it. Where once fishermen lowered nets, where barges carried salt, wine, and grain, there is only silence and frost. This isn't the playful glaze of a pond in December. This is a deep freeze that strangles trade, starves markets, and pins entire regions into stillness. The river was the road, the lifeline. In medieval Europe, waterways mattered more than most roads, which in winter were mud, ruts, or snow-blocked. But now the river is a grave of commerce. You can see boats trapped, hulls leaning at odd angles, their crews long gone. The ice creaks faintly under its own weight, like bones shifting. The air smells faintly metallic, sharp as if the river itself has turned to steel. You're not alone. A handful of merchants stand nearby, stamping their feet, cloaks tight, staring with hollow eyes at what used to be their livelihood. Bales of cloth meant for the next town, barrels of salt fish from the coast, wheels of cheese all stranded upriver or stuck behind frozen locks. Markets that relied on steady flow now collapse in a matter of weeks. Inns stand empty. Streets are eerily quiet. A world without movement is a world without food, without trade, without news. One mainstream fact drawn from medieval chronicles. During the colder spells of the Little Ice Age, major rivers like the Seine, the Thames, and even parts of the Baltic coast froze over for weeks at a time. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an economic disaster. Imagine London cut off from shipments, Paris without flour, Baltic towns without salt to cure fish. The ice became an invisible wall choking life itself. And yet, humans are nothing, if not stubborn. Merchants devised tricks to drag sledges over the ice, hauling goods by brute strength where water once carried them easily. Others waited for snow to crust enough that carts could slide along, turning frozen rivers into temporary highways. You picture yourself bent forward, rope cutting into your shoulders, dragging a sled heavy with barrels across an endless sheet of white, each breath a puff of frozen mist. The creak of the rope, the groan of ice beneath your boots, its survival disguised as commerce. Some accounts hint at ingenuity that borders on absurd. One quirky tale from a Flemish town describes merchants using pigskins inflated with air as makeshift skates, shuffling across ice with awkward leaps. Another story claims wine barrels were rolled over frozen rivers as cargo sleds, villagers laughing as they pushed them like giant toys. Behind the humor, though, is desperation. If trade stops entirely, bellies will empty, and purses will dry. You glance down at the ice. It's not smooth, jagged cracks zigzag across its surface, black lines where water still heaves beneath. You hear the low groan, like something ancient sighing. Every step you take might hold or might splinter. Travelers have fallen through before, bodies vanishing beneath the white crust, muffled screams swallowed by dark water. You step cautiously, boots sliding, rope in your hands, and feel the world sway under you. Historians still argue whether these recurring freezes were more devastating to peasants or to merchants. Some suggest peasants suffered most, unable to sell surplus grain or buy what they lacked. Others believe merchants bore the brunt, losing fortunes as cargo spoiled in stranded warehouses. Perhaps both are true. To you, trudging across this expanse, the distinction feels meaningless. Hunger and loss spread evenly when trade stops. You pass a riverside market, or what used to be one. Stalls stand empty, awnings sagging under snow. A child kicks at frozen mud where apples once rolled in abundance. The smell of roasting fish and hot pies has been replaced by nothing at all, just cold, empty air. The silence unnerves you. Town squares were supposed to be noisy, alive with bargaining, shouting, laughter. Now only crows caw from rooftops, scavengers waiting for what scraps of life remain. And yet, people adapt. Some villages hold fairs directly on the frozen rivers, as though to reclaim what nature has stolen. Merchants set up booths on the ice, selling roasted chestnuts, wool mittens, even hot wine kept warm in cauldrons. Flags whip in the icy wind, children chase each other, and for a fleeting day, the freeze becomes a festival. You wander through one of these makeshift fairs, stamping your feet, breathing in the smoky scent of roasting meat, marveling at the resilience hidden in human stubbornness. You bite into a hot chestnut, burning your tongue, and for a moment you forget the famine, the silence, the danger. But reality waits at the edges. Beyond the laughter, frozen barges still lie abandoned. Guilds argue bitterly in town halls. Taxes go unpaid. Nobles grumble over lost income. And in every hut, peasants still count dwindling stores, wondering if trade will revive before their cupboards empty. The fairs are sparks of warmth in a long, dark season, but sparks burn out quickly. You trudge homeward as dusk falls, the river a white plain glowing faintly in the dying light. The cold deepens, so sharp it feels alive against your skin, slicing through cloak and boots as though they aren't there. Somewhere beneath the ice, water still flows, unseen, relentless, reminding you that life goes on under the crust, hidden but waiting. You cling to that thought. If rivers can move beneath their prison of frost, perhaps you too can endure, moving quietly under the weight of winter until spring finally cracks it open. And as you step off the ice, back onto the snowy bank, you glance one last time at the silent river. You see the frozen ships, the sagging stalls, the faint tracks of sledges, a world on pause. But in that pause, people survive. You tug your cloak tighter, set your jaw against the wind, and walk on. You trudge through drifts again, but this time your path leads not to a smoky hut or a frozen river, but toward the looming silhouette of a stone manor. The contrast strikes you immediately. On one side of the valley, peasants huddle in hovels where smoke stings the eyes and frost gathers on rafters. On the other, lords dine in draughty halls that, though cold by modern standards, still hold the illusion of plenty. Winter divides the world more sharply than any wall. Inside the manor's great hall, a fire blazes in the central hearth, wood piled so high it crackles like a storm. The heat radiates unevenly, scorching for those closest, fading into chill at the edges. Tapestries hang heavy on the walls, not just for decoration but to block drafts seeping through stone. The smell is richer here. Roasted meats, spiced wine, beeswax candles. You inhale, stomach twisting at the thought of it. Historical chronicles describe the abundance of noble tables even in times of scarcity. Venison from winter hunts, salted pork from well-stocked larders, pies filled with preserved fruits. Yet, beyond the walls, villagers scrape by on cabbage broth and acorn bread. The gap feels obscene when you stand in both worlds within the same breath. And then there are the odd customs that remind you privilege doesn't always mean comfort. One eccentric detail from feast records. Wealthy households sometimes placed heated stones in foot warmers under the table, so lords and ladies could dine without their toes going numb. Servants scurried back and forth with new stones, red hot from the fire. Imagine balancing elegance with the faint smell of scorched wood drifting up from beneath your boots. At the edge of the hall, musicians pluck strings, filling the air with notes that shimmer faintly above the clatter of knives on trenchers. For the nobles, winter is an inconvenience, a backdrop to their entertainments. For peasants, it is the whole story. You picture a villager glancing toward this hall, hearing faint music over the wind, wondering how the same season can feel like luxury for some and death for others. Scholars continue to puzzle over just how deep this divide cut into medieval life. Was the abundance of noble stores truly as plentiful as chroniclers bragged, or was it partly exaggerated display? Were lords actually as comfortable as the records suggest, or did cold stone halls gnaw at them too, just cushioned by thicker furs? The truth likely lies somewhere between. But when you stand in the courtyard, smelling roasting meat while hunger claws at your belly, the contrast is not academic, it is visceral. Outside, peasants return from collecting firewood, their faces raw from wind. They carry bundles of sticks so small it seems impossible they'll last even a night. They bow their heads toward the manor, partly from custom, partly from hope that perhaps a scrap of food might trickle down. Inside, dogs gnaw on bones richer than anything those villagers will see all winter. You walk between both worlds, feeling the pull. The warmth of the hall tempts you roaring fire, rich smells, laughter echoing off stone. Yet the huts call to you with their honest suffering, their smoke-stained rafters and shared bowls of soup. One world glitters, the other groans. And in winter, the line between them feels like ice-thin, brittle, ready to crack. The nobles feast, yes, but they are not immune. Their hunts grow more dangerous in deep snow. Their stored wine freezes into slush in cold cellars. Their grand halls still echo with draughts. You watch a lord in a velvet robe shiver despite the furs around his shoulders, lifting a cup with fingers reddened by the chill. The fire blazes, yet even here, winter has a way of creeping in. By contrast, in the peasant hut, fire is never taken for granted. Every spark is precious, every ember banked carefully under ash to survive until morning. Families guard it like treasure, knowing the difficulty of kindling fresh flame with flint and tinder. The smell of smoke there is not luxury but lifeline. The differences cut sharper at night. In noble halls, the music continues late, torches flaring along walls while dogs curl on rushes. In villages, darkness drops heavy, pierced only by faint flicker from cracks in shutters. Children whimper in sleep, cold seeping into their bones. Both worlds exist in the same valley, under the same stars, yet separated by walls of stone and walls of fortune. You pull your cloak tighter, stepping away from the manor. The echoes of laughter and song fade, replaced again by the hiss of wind across snow. The contrast lingers in your mind, feasts and famine, roaring hearths and dying embers. And you realize that winter is not only a battle with cold, it is a mirror of inequality, making visible the fault lines of society. Some endure with bellies full, others with bellies hollow, but all endure beneath the same merciless sky. You hitch your cloak higher on your shoulders, breath fogging in the air as you follow the sound of iron striking iron. At first you think it's a smithy, but no, what you're hearing is armor clinking as soldiers march across frozen ground. Winter does not wait for wars to end, and wars do not wait for spring to return. Instead, the two tangle together, leaving men to fight not only enemies but the cold itself. Snow muffles their boots, but every step still crunches loud against the silence. Helmets gleam with frost, chainmail stiff from frozen sweat. You picture yourself marching in that line, spear clutched tight, hands raw and stiff even inside leather gloves. The air bites your lungs, and you cough into the wool wrapped around your face, a feeble shield against the wind. Armies that once travelled with pomp and banners now shuffle grimly like pilgrims through a white wasteland. Chroniclers from campaigns in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe note just how brutal winter fighting could be. Horses slipped on icy roads, their hooves clattering like stones. Wagons broke axles in frozen ruts. Men collapsed mid-march, not from wounds but from exhaustion and frost. Military history tends to spotlight battles, but the greater killer was often weather itself. The chronicles whisper that more soldiers perished from cold and hunger than from sword or arrow. And yet, there are details that feel almost absurd. One record describes soldiers urinating on their bowstrings to soften the frozen fibers before shooting. Another mentions warriors wrapping their weapons in cloth at night, not to keep them polished but to stop the steel from splitting in the cold. Imagine pulling a sword from its sheath only to find it cracked like glass. Warfare in winter turned iron into brittle bone. From the edge of the camp you hear coughs and curses, the low groan of men huddled beneath makeshift tents. Fires burn low, guarded jealously. Smoke snakes into the air, carrying the bitter smell of half-burned wood and damp wool. Rations run thin. Salted meat stiffens in the cold. Bread freezes into stone. Hard loaves. You try to bite one, teeth ringing as though on rock. Soldiers boil snow into thin gruel, sipping it greedily despite the taste of ash drifting in from nearby fires. Some modern historians wonder whether winter campaigns were deliberate strategies or simply accidents of circumstance. Did commanders intend to strike when foes were weak, or did they misjudge how long autumn supplies would last? Others suggest that harsh winters were used almost as weapons themselves, wearing enemies down more effectively than swords ever could. Standing here, feeling your legs tremble under the weight of frozen armor, the debate feels distant. All you know is that marching in this cold is war enough. You look around the camp. Men scrape frost off shields, rub hands together, curse at numb feet. A few joke half-heartedly, laughter puffing like smoke in the icy air. Camaraderie becomes as valuable as food. One soldier shares a flask of watered-down ale, passing it from hand to hand. Another sings a bawdy tune, voice shaking but steady, trying to kindle warmth through humor. It's not strategy, it's survival disguised as camaraderie. The battlefields themselves are grim theaters. Blood on snow stands out like spilled ink, freezing into dark stains before steam even rises. Fallen men stiffen where they lie, weapons clutched to chests, faces turned skyward in permanent expressions of surprise. Horses neigh desperately, breath pluming, hooves kicking at ice they cannot escape. The clash of steel is sharp, but the silence afterward is sharper still. And yet, humans adapt. Soldiers line their boots with straw, sew extra patches onto cloaks, even borrow women's woolen skirts in desperation for warmth. In some chronicles you read of men tying dried moss around their shins as makeshift leggings, insulation born from ingenuity. These aren't the images painted in tapestries of noble knights, they're men with frozen noses, clutching whatever scrap of heat they can muster. One night, you sit near the campfire, rubbing your hands together, staring into flames. Sparks drift upward, swallowed by the black sky. The fire smells of pine resin and smoke, but you still shiver. Across the fire, a soldier tells a story about a comrade who fell asleep on watch, leaning against a tree. In the morning, they found him frozen solid, still upright, eyes glazed. It sounds like a cautionary tale, but no one laughs. Everyone glances toward the shadows, suddenly more awake. Later, as you lie under a thin blanket, you hear the wind rattle through the camp. The tents flap, poles groan. Armor clinks faintly as men shift in restless sleep. You close your eyes, but the cold seeps in anyway. A living thing crawling through your bones. You curl tighter, whispering a prayer you barely believe. Tomorrow you march again, and tomorrow the cold will march with you. Perhaps the strangest thought is this. The enemy faces the same torment. Across the frozen field, they too huddle by fires, curse numb feet, sip thin broth. War in winter is a shared misery. Two armies trapped in the same icy prison, fighting not only each other, but the season itself. You realize with a shiver that winter is the one true victor, every time. You wake to the sound of coughing, not the occasional rasp of a smoker's throat, but the deep, rattling chorus of dozens of bodies trapped in one barn. The air is heavy with it, a mixture of damp straw, sweat, and illness that clings to your nostrils. Winter does not travel alone. It brings hunger first, then sickness that slips easily through weakened frames. When bellies are empty and fires are faint, the body becomes fragile, and plagues of every sort find their chance. In times like the Great Famine years of the 14th century, villagers described barns turned into infirmaries. People lay shoulder to shoulder on straw mats, cloaks pulled tight, eyes glassy with fever. The cold should have killed germs, you think, but in truth the crowding of desperate people turned huts and barns into breeding grounds. Lung sicknesses thrived, coughs spreading from mouth to mouth faster than any priest could say a prayer. Chronicles recount that in many regions, mortality from disease during harsh winters equaled or even surpassed deaths from starvation itself. The body could endure a few weeks of hunger, but once weakened, it surrendered to fevers and flux. What kills you is rarely the cold directly, it is the company it keeps. And in this barn, where you now crouch beside the sick, you see it clearly. Children curled in mother's arms wheeze with each breath, lips pale. An old man shakes so hard his teeth chatter even under two blankets. The fire at the far end of the room is little more than embers, its warmth reaching no further than a few lucky souls. The smell is sharp, sweat souring on skin, smoke scratching throats, the faint iron tang of blood in cloths pressed to mouths. It's easy to forget how fragile the line was between life and death in such winters. One curious anecdote, preserved in parish records, describes villagers hanging sprigs of juniper and rosemary in rafters to cleanse the air. The smoke of burning herbs was thought to ward off disease. Whether it helped or not is uncertain, but the pungent aroma filled rooms, masking the stench of illness, giving at least the sense that something was being done. Others sprinkled vinegar on rushes or wore bags of garlic around their necks. Half medicine, half ritual, wholly desperate. Some modern researchers argue that poor sanitation, not just hunger, drove these epidemics. Packed into small huts with little ventilation, bodies coughed and sweated in close quarters, spreading contagion easily. Others suggest malnutrition itself made simple colds into killers. The debate continues in journals and studies, but in your reality, sitting here on a bale of straw, listening to hacking coughs, the cause matters less than the fact. The weak die first. You watch as a woman ladles broth into a cup for her husband. It is little more than hot water flavored with cabbage leaves, but she holds it as if it were gold. He sips, eyes closing, steam fogging his lashes. For a moment the barn feels softer. A song stirs at one end, a lullaby hummed to quiet a restless child. The melody weaves faintly, almost drowned by coughs, but it persists. Even here, in the shadow of illness, people find ways to remind themselves they are still alive. Then a shout breaks the hush. Someone has died. The room shifts uneasily, bodies turning, eyes darting. There is no ceremony, no priest available at every moment. The corpse will be carried out tomorrow, wrapped in linen, buried in frozen ground. For tonight, it lies quiet at the edge of the barn, face turned toward the rafters, as though still listening to the lullaby. The image unsettles you. You draw your cloak tighter, breath shallow. The cold outside seems cleaner suddenly, more merciful than this heavy, infected air. But you cannot leave. To step outside is to risk frostbite. To stay inside is to risk fever. Either way, survival feels like a wager. Odd remedies appear in hushed voices. A farmer insists on placing warm bread on a sick man's chest to draw out the phlegm. A mother cuts a cross into an onion and sets it by her child's bed, convinced it absorbs the sickness overnight. There's a kind of poetry to these gestures, strange, earthy, almost comical, but also a raw humanity. People will try anything when winter corners them. And all the while, the barn creaks under its snowy roof. Wind whistles through gaps in the boards, and snow drifts against the door. The outside world waits, silent, frozen, but inside the air is thick with struggle. You realize that the worst winters of the Middle Ages were never just about weather. They were about how cold turned into hunger, and hunger into sickness. The chain was inevitable, like falling dominoes. By dawn, 2 more are dead. The bodies are carried out stiff, wrapped hastily in whatever cloth can be spared. The ground outside is too hard to dig deeply, so shallow graves are carved with axes, soil frozen into stone. The sound of iron biting earth rings in your ears, more chilling than any sword clash. Death here is not glorious. It is quiet, daily, repetitive, wearing people down not in one sweep, but in endless attrition. And yet, you step back into the barn, because where else can you go? The coughs continue, the lullabies return, the broth simmers. Life persists, as stubborn as the cold itself. You sit down, shoulders hunched, listening to both the rattle of sickness and the whisper of song, realizing that this is what survival looks like in the harshest winters. Not triumph, but persistence, one breath at a time. You push open the byre door, expecting the familiar warmth of animals huddled together. Instead, a wall of silence greets you. The air is still, thick with the sour scent of dung and hay, but missing the low, comforting noises you've always known. No shuffling hooves, no sleepy moos, no rustling of straw. Then you see them. Oxen stiff on the ground, eyes glassy, breath long since fled. Their bodies are glazed in frost, steam no longer rising from nostrils. For a moment, you simply stand there, unable to move. These beasts were not just animals, they were muscle, transport, lifelines. Without them, fields will remain unploughed, carts unmoved. Winter does not only strike at human flesh, it strikes at the very tools of survival. Accounts from manorial records describe winter die-offs of livestock as devastating blows to whole communities. Cows, horses, and sheep perished when fodder ran out, or when barns, barely insulated, let the cold seep through. It's hard to imagine the scale until you stand among carcasses frozen solid, their ribs sharp under tight skin, their tails stiff like boards. To a medieval household, losing animals was as serious as losing kin. You kneel by one ox, laying a hand on its flank. It is hard as stone. The smell is faint but unmistakable, a mix of hay and death, of frozen fat beginning to sour. You know what must happen next. The villagers will gather, not to mourn but to salvage. Meat, hide, bone, nothing can go to waste. The butchering begins quickly. Axes ring, knives scrape, and soon steam rises from the carcasses as flesh meets cold air. The smell of blood is sharp, metallic, mingling with smoke from the fires kindled outside. It is grotesque, but it is life. You find yourself with a strip of meat in your hands, red fingers numb, working because hunger outweighs disgust. People wrap cuts in cloth, burying some in snow as makeshift storage. Dogs whine at the edges, eyes glowing, kept at bay with kicks and curses. One curious note appears in accounts from harsh winters. Villagers sometimes salted meat by rubbing it with ashes when salt supplies ran out. It didn't taste good, but it slowed rot long enough to stretch provisions. Imagine chewing a strip of ox flesh flavored faintly of fireplace and feeling grateful for it. That is survival in this season. As you work, you hear someone muttering about bad omens. To lose so many animals at once must mean God's anger, or perhaps a curse. Others blame the lord of the manor for hoarding grain, while peasants scrounge for fodder. Fear sharpens into suspicion, suspicion into whispers. Winter doesn't just kill, it breeds blame. Scholars continue to discuss whether medieval livestock deaths were more due to climate extremes or simple lack of preparation. Was it colder winters that struck down herds, or the shortage of hay after flooded summers that left barns bare? Some argue it was both, a vicious circle of weather and scarcity. For you, bent over a carcass with an axe, it doesn't matter. The ox is dead, the hay is gone, and the question is how to make what remains last. The work stretches into night. Torches flicker, throwing long shadows against the byre walls. You wrap meat in cloth, stack bones for boiling, scrape fat into jars. The sound of knives is constant, steady as breathing. At last, the animals are reduced not to corpses but to stores. Slabs of flesh, hides for leather, sinew for thread. Their warmth is gone, but their bodies still give one last gift of survival. When you finally step outside, the air feels colder. The stars glitter, cruel and clear, over fields buried in snow. The ground crunches under your boots, blood-staining white patches into rusty red. You shiver, not just from the wind, but from the sight behind you. Tomorrow there will be stew simmering in pots, broth rich and filling. Tonight, there is only the echo of silence in the byre, where life once breathed. And yet, even in this grimness, there are sparks of resilience. Children run to sniff the cooking, eyes wide at the promise of real meat. Women stitch hides into cloaks, already warmer against the frost. Men stir great cauldrons, steam fogging their beards, the smell both heavy and hopeful. The oxen are gone, but the village endures, piecing together strength from loss. You sit by the fire, bowl in hand, sipping broth that tastes of fat and ashes. It warms your stomach, coats your throat, fills you with a heaviness that borders on comfort. You think of the ox's lifeless eyes, of the silence in the barn, and you swallow anyway. Survival demands it, winter demands it, and you comply, because what else can you do? The fire crackles, the stars gleam, and you wrap your cloak tighter. Around you the village murmurs, voices hushed but steady, speaking of tomorrow's tasks, of spring's faint promise. In the harshest winters, every loss is also an offering. The oxen are gone, but their strength lingers in your veins. And for now, that is enough. You wake to a morning that feels colder than the night before, if that's even possible. The air in your lungs burns, sharp as needles, and every exhale rises in a pale cloud that hangs longer than it should, as if the world itself is too sluggish to disperse it. You shuffle outside, boots crunching on snow so deep it nearly swallows your ankles, and you feel the sky pressing down a dull grey lid on the world. This is no ordinary winter. This is the creeping shadow of something larger, the shift in climate that people centuries later would call the Little Ice Age. But in your time, you don't have names for it. You just know that the cold keeps coming, harsher and more frequent, as though the seasons themselves have turned against you. Villagers whisper about how the summers are shorter, wetter, and never warm enough to fatten grain. They mutter that grapes rot before ripening, that hay never dries properly, that even hardy root crops shrivel in sodden soil. The pattern isn't obvious year by year, but living through it, you feel it. Winters drag on longer, springs arrive later, and harvests shrink. Hunger used to be a misfortune. Now it feels like a certainty. Clerical records from the 14th century hint at this change. Monks jot notes of rivers freezing more often, of wine turning to slush in casks, of storms battering coasts with unusual violence. At the time, they interpret it as divine displeasure, punishment for sin, omens of apocalypse. But with the perspective of later centuries, scientists piece together evidence of volcanic eruptions and subtle changes in ocean currents, nudging Europe into a chill that lingered for hundreds of years. You look around the village and see how the cold seeps into everything. The roof beams groan under snow so heavy it bends them. The well is frozen solid. Water must be hacked out of nearby streams with axes. Laundry freezes stiff before it can dry. Cloaks stiff as planks. You rub your hands together and wonder if this is simply the worst winter you've ever known or the first of many more to come. A curious detail emerges in some accounts. In certain regions, people began altering calendars to cope, shifting feast days or planting rituals weeks later than before. They sensed that the natural rhythm had changed, even if they couldn't explain why. Imagine standing in a field, seed bags slung at your hip, staring at frozen clods in April, waiting for warmth that never comes. Year after year, frustration hardens into resignation. Scholars today debate whether the Little Ice Age hit all regions equally. Some argue Northern Europe suffered the worst, while Mediterranean lands muddled through with less disruption. Others point to global signs, harvest failures in China, famines in the Andes, as evidence it was not just local but planetary. For you, wrapped in a patched cloak in a damp hut. The scope doesn't matter. The cold is everywhere you turn, and that is enough. The soundscape of these winters is unforgettable. Trees crack in the night, splitting with gunshot echoes as sap freezes and expands. The wind moans low through village lanes, rattling shutters, prying at doors. Dogs bark at shadows, their voices harsh in the still air. And always, in the background, the crunch of boots on snow, steady as a drumbeat. Even silence is different, heavy, as though sound itself freezes mid-air. Food, already scarce, grows stranger. Villagers begin to eat what they never considered before. Boiled moss scraped from rocks, dried nettles ground into meal, bark shaved into thin strips for broth. There's a grim joke passed from house to house. You can eat anything once. And yet, people do survive. They grow inventive, stretching what little they have in ways their ancestors never imagined. Children still play, though. You watch them slide on frozen ponds, shrieking with laughter, cheeks red, bodies bundled in wool. They fashion toys from ice, throw snowballs, build forts out of drifted heaps. For them, the cold is less curse than playground. Their laughter echoes, momentarily banishing the heaviness. You smile despite yourself, reminded that life clings stubbornly even in the harshest climates. At night, you sit by the fire, staring into flames that barely warm your bones. The firewood pile shrinks dangerously, each log a decision. Burn now for comfort or save for tomorrow. The choice weighs heavily, especially when you know tomorrow's cold will feel just as sharp. The smoke clings to your hair, your clothes, your breath. Yet you lean closer anyway, soaking up what little heat escapes. Some villagers mutter of omens, comets streaking the sky, eclipses darkening the sun, all signs that the heavens themselves are closing in. Priests preach repentance, urging confession, fasting, prayer. Others turn to folk charms, hanging iron above doors, burning herbs, whispering incantations to scare away frost spirits. Between faith and fear, people search for meaning, because suffering feels heavier when it seems senseless. You wonder what the world will look like in 50 years, in 100. Will winters always be this cruel? Will children know summers bright and warm, or only grey skies and damp fields? These thoughts settle on you like snow, cold but quiet. You shake them off, because the immediate tasks remain the same. Find food, gather wood, keep breathing. Survival is both simple and impossible. When you finally lie down to sleep, the rafters creak above you, snow shifting on the roof. Your blanket is scratchy, your feet icy, your stomach hollow. You close your eyes anyway, whispering a prayer, or maybe just a wish, that tomorrow the sky will clear, that the sun will shine, that spring will come early for once. It probably won't, but hope is a warmth you can't afford to lose. You enter the cloister of a monastery, its stone arches crusted with frost. The bells above silent because the ropes are frozen stiff. The air smells of tallow candles and damp stone, yet the scribes are already at work. You hear the faint scratching of quills on parchment, the rhythm steady as if it were a prayer in itself. These monks do more than pray in winter, they record, observe, and preserve what others only mutter about over firesides. At a long table, bent under woolen hoods, they write about the season's severity. Margins fill with notes of snows lasting 3 months, or the river ice holding men and carts. For them, these are not just complaints but signs. To write the weather is to interpret the will of heaven, and in their eyes, every blizzard, every frozen field, is more than nature, it is a message. One preserved chronicle from a French abbey describes an entire vineyard ruined by frost, the vines blackened before harvest. To the monks, this wasn't merely a failed vintage but evidence of divine displeasure. Wine was the blood of Christ. For it to freeze in barrels seemed like a warning of cosmic proportions. In another scriptorium, a brother recorded how birds fell frozen mid-flight, their stiff bodies thudding onto cloister roofs. Imagine sitting in silence and hearing a dull thump above you, only to find a sparrow rigid as carved wood. There are also more curious entries, tucked into margins. One monk in the Rhineland scribbled about stars burning brighter in the cold air, a hint that harsh winters made the sky itself clearer, more piercing. Another noted that cats were restless during blizzards, pacing as though they sensed spirits in the snow. Such details read less like science and more like superstition, yet they paint vivid pictures of how the chill touched every layer of life. Modern historians often debate how much faith colored these monastic reports. Were monks accurate weather observers, or were their notes tilted by theology, every frost read as punishment, every thaw as grace? Some scholars argue their precision with dates and seasons makes them invaluable sources for reconstructing climate. Others caution that their obsession with omens clouds their reliability. For you, standing in the cold cloister, both explanations blend. The scratch of quill carries both fact and faith, inseparable. You wander deeper, hearing the chant of monks in the chapel. The voices echo in the stone, low and resonant, warming the air not with heat but with sound. The hymn lingers on words of penitence, asking mercy for sins that might have brought on the frost. It is hard not to feel the weight of guilt, even if you doubt the connection. When every field is barren, when every hearth struggles, people cling to explanations that make suffering bearable. If frost is punishment, then prayer is at least a response. One peculiar custom stands out. In some monasteries, candles were lit day and night during long winters, not only for light but as a symbolic shield against the encroaching dark. Monks measured their days by these flickering flames, recording hours not by sunlight but by how far wax melted. Picture sitting hunched over parchment, hands aching with cold, relying on a guttering flame to tell you when to pause for prayer. The smell of melting wax mingles with ink, smoke, and musty vellum, a scent as much a part of winter as snow itself. Outside, peasants come to monasteries for guidance. Some bring offerings of eggs or wool in exchange for blessings against frost. Others beg for food, for monasteries often held reserves in their cellars. You see lines of gaunt faces at the gates, children wrapped in scraps, mothers clutching clay bowls. The monks distribute thin porridge, not enough to fill, but enough to sustain one more night. Within their walls, charity mingles uneasily with hierarchy, but in winter, any help matters. And yet, even monks are not immune. Their cloisters are cold, their dormitories draughty. Brothers sleep huddled together under coarse blankets, their breaths clouding the air. Their hands chap from endless copying, their lips crack from chanting in icy chapels. Devotion does not shield them from frostbite or hunger, though it gives their suffering a frame of meaning. You glance at their faces, pale but calm, and you wonder if faith truly warms, or if discipline alone keeps them steady. As night falls, the scriptorium glows faintly with candlelight. The scratching of quills slows, parchment stacked neatly, blotches of ink frozen mid-flow. Outside, the wind howls through cloisters, rattling the bell tower. Inside, the monks kneel in prayer, voices weaving together like threads in a tapestry. You close your eyes and feel the vibration in your chest. The world may be frozen, but words, chants, and ink endure. And so, the monks record another winter, another season of famine, another year of snow. Their words travel through centuries, whispering to you across time. They remind you that even in the darkest nights, someone was paying attention, scratching down the details of frost and faith, leaving behind echoes of human endurance in ink. You step outside into the sharp light of a winter morning and hear something unusual: laughter. Not the bitter, strained chuckles of adults swapping survival tales, but the shrill, high-pitched joy of children. Across the village green, a group of them has carved a path into the snow with their boots, sliding down a slope on pieces of barrel staves. Their cheeks glow bright as embers against the pale air, their voices carrying above the muffled quiet of snow-laden roofs. For a moment, the season feels less like a prison and more like a playground. It is easy to forget that childhood persists even in famine and frost. Archaeological digs in Europe have uncovered little toys carved from wood or bone, tiny horses, dolls, spinning tops that date to these same centuries of harsh winters. Life was fragile, but children still whittled, still played, still made games out of scraps. Imagine crouching in the snow with them, tugging a carved stick horse behind you, the icy ground crunching underfoot. In their laughter, the cold becomes something less monstrous. The games of winter were not just amusements, they were exercises in adaptation. One account from a German village notes children strapping flat pieces of wood to their shoes, sliding across frozen ponds, the clumsy ancestors of ice skates. In England, some used pig bladders, inflated and tied to sticks, as makeshift balloons to bat through the air. The absurdity of it makes you smile. Even amid hunger and frost, ingenuity finds expression in play. You watch as a group builds a fort of packed snow, walls rising higher with each armful. Another team shapes snowballs, not gentle tosses but hard-packed ammunition ready for mock battles. The cries ring out. Shouts of victory, squeals of retreat. For them, war is still a game, unburdened by the real blood-soaking frozen fields only miles away. You can almost taste the powdery cold as a snowball explodes against your cloak. Contemporary observers occasionally noted such scenes. Clerics sometimes frowned, describing children playing in snow as a waste of energy in lean years. Yet others saw it as a sign of resilience that even in scarcity, the human spirit sought laughter. Modern historians often point to these details as reminders that survival was not only about calories and warmth, but about morale. Villages without joy might not endure as long as those where children still played. The sensory world of these games is vivid. You hear the squeak of boots in packed snow, the crack as ice splinters under weight, the peals of laughter mingling with the bark of dogs chasing after sleds. You smell wood smoke on the air, carried from nearby chimneys, mingled with the faint tang of sweat rising from woolen tunics soaked in melted snow. The children's mittens are little more than rags, yet their hands are red and alive, flinging snow with abandon. There is a poignant contrast here. Inside huts, parents ration broth, stare at dwindling woodpiles and whisper prayers. Outside, their children throw themselves down snowy hills, careless, free. You wonder if those parents, listening from doorways, feel comfort or despair at the sound. Does laughter remind them that life continues? Or does it sting, knowing how fragile that life might be before spring? One curious custom emerges in stories. In some villages, children sang winter rhymes while skating or sledding, verses that mixed play with superstition, lines warning the frost not to bite, or calling the sun to shine. The melodies were simple, repetitive, chanted almost like spells. Imagine the chorus of high voices echoing over frozen fields, half game, half incantation. To the children it was fun. To the adults, perhaps it was hope disguised as song. Scholars today reflect on whether these small joys carried real significance for community survival. Did laughter in bleak seasons sustain morale in ways as crucial as food? Some argue that play helped shape cultural memory, teaching resilience through games. Others suggest it was simply instinct, a way for children to burn energy while the world strained around them. Whichever is true, the sound of those voices feels like defiance. As the sun dips lower, the games slow, fingers numb, cheeks raw. The children retreat to huts where fires sputter. The slope lies scarred with sled marks, forts crumbling, snowballs abandoned. You stand alone in the fading light, the silence returning as quickly as it left. The wind picks up, whistling through bare branches, filling the space where laughter was. And yet the memory lingers. You can almost hear the echoes still, carried faintly on the cold air. In the harshest winters, joy was rare but not absent. It came in flashes: a game, a rhyme, a race on barrel staves. It was fragile, fleeting, but enough to remind you that even under ice, the heart of life kept beating. When you return to the hut, the gloom feels heavier for having heard that laughter. You sit by the hearth, broth steaming faintly, and close your eyes. The sound of children's play loops in your mind, a ghost of warmth in the frozen dark. You hold on to it like a coal in your hands, knowing it might be the only fire you can carry through the night. You cross the bank of the river and stop short, for the sight before you is like something from a dream. Where water once churned dark and restless, there is now a wide, gleaming expanse of ice. But instead of emptiness, you see a crowd, lanterns glowing, tents pitched, flags fluttering in the biting wind. It is not a battlefield, nor a marketplace on solid earth. It is a fair sprawled across the frozen Thames, or perhaps the Seine, or any river broad enough to host such audacity. For once, the season's cruelty has been twisted into spectacle. The air rings with voices, laughter, bargaining. You weave between stalls set up directly on the ice, boards laid across barrels to hold up tables laden with goods. Roasted chestnuts sizzle in iron pans, the smoke sweet and nutty against the sharp cold. Jugglers toss balls wrapped in rags, their breath puffing with each arc. Children tug at parents' cloaks, eyes wide at painted masks and cheap toys carved from bone. It feels almost festive, as though winter's grip has been momentarily forgotten. Records tell us that during the colder phases of the so-called Little Ice Age, the Thames in London froze solid enough to host frost fairs, some lasting weeks. Merchants seized the opportunity to hawk wares, tavern keepers built makeshift booths to sell ale, even printers set up presses to sell novelty pamphlets declaring the fair itself. One surviving souvenir reads, "Printed on the ice of the River Thames, proof of human audacity in the face of weather." But beyond the curiosities, there are practicalities too. When bridges were impassable and ferries stranded, fairs filled the gap. You can buy mittens, ropes of onions, even salted fish hauled in on sledges. It is commerce rerouted through the frozen heart of the river. Imagine sliding across the slick surface, a bundle of wool slung over your shoulder, praying the ice holds under the combined weight of booths and bodies. Some details from eyewitnesses verge on the absurd. One account mentions oxen being roasted whole on the ice, their smell drifting far downstream, attracting crowds like moths to flame. Another describes ice bowling villagers hurling stones at wooden pins, the crash echoing against the banks. There's even a story of temporary taverns named the Crown of Frost, or the Bear on the Ice, signs painted hastily and nailed into the frozen surface. These tales sound almost too whimsical, but the records insist they happened. The sensory tapestry overwhelms you. The ice creaks faintly underfoot, but laughter and music drown out the unease. Fiddlers play lively tunes, their fingers red and raw, yet the melodies quicken your pulse. The smell of hot meat mingles with that of burning pitch in torches, creating a haze that both warms and stings the eyes. You taste sweet wine heated with spices, thick and syrupy against your tongue, a rare luxury that makes your chest glow. Of course, danger lurks beneath the revelry. Everyone knows the ice may not last. Rumors ripple through the crowd whenever a crack echoes. Was it just the shifting current, or something more ominous? Now and then, booths collapse when ice gives way, merchants scrambling to haul goods back from the water's edge. You step carefully, heart lurching at each groan under your boots. Yet the fair continues, because hunger and monotony are deadlier enemies than ice. Contemporary scholars discuss whether these fairs were defiance or necessity. Were people celebrating in spite of hardship, or were they simply seizing a rare chance to trade when other routes were blocked? Some argue both are true, that survival and joy often braided together in ways modern eyes find hard to separate. Standing here with your cup of hot wine, watching jugglers toss burning brands into the frozen night, you feel that truth. Merriment itself becomes a form of resistance. As the evening darkens, lanterns glow brighter, their reflections shimmering across the ice like fallen stars. A troupe of dancers twirls in heavy woolen skirts, their boots sliding, arms linked, voices raised in song. Children chase after them, slipping and falling, then laughing harder for it. A dog barks wildly, chasing a ball of snow as if it were treasure. All around, the frozen river thrums with life, as though mocking the bleakness of huts and famine beyond the banks. But fairs do not last. In days or weeks, thaw will come, sudden and merciless. Merchants will pack up, booths dismantled, banners pulled down. The ice will crack, the river will swallow what remains. Already you can hear faint trickles underfoot, water moving unseen. The joy is temporary, fragile, but perhaps that is what makes it so fierce. People dance harder knowing it may collapse tomorrow. They sing louder because silence waits at the edges. When at last you leave, feet sore and face flushed, the sound of fiddles trails behind you. The fair fades into distance, lanterns shrinking into a cluster of fireflies on the frozen plain. You climb the bank, look back once more, and see the improbable sight. A marketplace floating on a river of glass, laughter rising into the cold air. In the harshest winters, humans still made carnivals on ice. You tuck the memory close as you trudge homeward, knowing you will carry it long after the thaw. The season is cruel, yes, but people are stranger, braver, and more stubborn than any frost. You lie awake one night in the hut, listening to the wind thread through the rafters, when an older woman begins to speak. Her voice is low, almost conspiratorial, as though the walls themselves mustn't overhear. She warns of frost demons that ride in on the wind, slipping down chimneys and into the cracks of doors. They steal warmth from your breath, she says, and nibble at fingers and toes until they blacken. The children around her pull blankets closer, wide-eyed. You smile at the story, half amused, half uneasy, because in the dark the line between tale and truth feels thin. Across Europe, winter bred stories like this. Folklore collected in Iceland speaks of beings called Jökulsvísa, icy trolls said to wander blizzards, shrieking to lure travelers off roads. In Germany, mothers told children that Frau Perchta, a winter spirit, would slash open lazy bellies left unfed. In the Carpathians, villagers carried iron charms against Morosco, the frostman who kissed cheeks into death. To modern ears, these tales sound fanciful, but when you sit by a dying fire with numb toes, they feel like explanations more convincing than invisible currents or distant volcanoes. And people did more than tell stories. They burned herbs in chimneys to fumigate their homes, sending fragrant smoke of juniper, rosemary, or sage curling into corners. Some hung wreaths of dried rowan berries, believed to repel icy spirits. Others placed bowls of milk outside at night, offerings to placate whatever walked in the storm. Imagine stepping outside at midnight, setting a small bowl on the snow, breath fogging around you, hoping unseen eyes would accept your bargain. From parish records, we know that villagers often blended these customs with Christian ritual. Candlemas in early February, for instance, was celebrated not just as a church feast, but as a shield against lingering cold. Priests blessed candles, and families carried the flame home to drive frost demons from their hearths. The light, flickering against smoky rafters, became both faith and superstition interwoven. Curious anecdotes abound. One chronicle from Poland describes villagers beating pots and pans during snowstorms, believing the clamour would frighten off winter spirits. Another mentions children carrying straw effigies of Grandfather Frost to the edge of town, burning him as a symbolic banishment. You picture the flames leaping high, sparks flying into the night, villagers cheering though the cold remains exactly the same. The debate among scholars today is whether such customs were truly believed or simply performed as tradition. Were people convinced frost demons existed, or did they cling to rituals out of habit and hope? Some argue that in times of repeated disaster, belief was the only logic left, better to bargain with spirits than face a void. Others suggest villagers half knew the futility, but still found comfort in lighting herbs or banging pans. Standing there in the hut, smoke rising, charms rattling on the door, you realize the question doesn't matter. In a world where frost kills silently, any ritual that grants courage has power. The sensory world of superstition is vivid. You smell acrid herbs crackling in the fire, filling the hut with pungency that masks even the stench of smoke. You see the glint of iron knives hung above doors, edges catching candlelight. You hear murmured chants, half prayer, half spell, as families circle together, eyes darting toward windows rimed with frost. Even touch becomes ritual, the feel of salt sprinkled across thresholds, the press of charms into cold skin. Outside, the night is fierce. The wind howls like voices, snow drifts high against doors, icicles groan as they lengthen. It is easy to believe something moves within it, shapes lurking just beyond sight. When the shutters rattle, you flinch despite yourself. Perhaps it is merely the gale, or perhaps, as the grandmother whispers, the frost demons are testing the door. And yet, woven into these fears is also community. Villagers gather to repeat rituals together, building bonfires, singing chants, telling tales until dawn. Fear shared becomes almost festive. You watch as neighbors huddle around flames, faces lit in orange glow, their voices raised against the dark. The cold still bites, but the act of standing shoulder to shoulder makes it feel less invincible. In the morning, children laugh at the melted remains of the straw effigy in the snow. Adults shake their heads, smile faintly, and go back to chores. Did it work? Perhaps. The storm has passed. Those storms always pass eventually. But the ritual left behind warmth, if not in the air, then in the heart. You realize that superstition, in its way, is another form of survival. It cannot thaw wells or fill barns, but it weaves meaning into misery, turns chaos into story, and gives people something to fight with, even if only words. And in winters so harsh they crush bodies and beasts alike, stories can be as necessary as firewood. That night, as you crawl under your blanket, you whisper the rhyme you heard the children chanting. Frost, frost, stay away. Sun will chase you, night will fray. You do not quite believe it, but you say it anyway. In the silence that follows, you think you hear the wind soften, just a little. The road stretches ahead, flanked by white fields and skeletal trees. But today it is not the silence that unnerves you, it is the figures lying still beside the track. At first, you think they are bundles of firewood dropped in haste, but as you draw closer, you see stiff hands, pale faces, cloaks frozen into rigid shapes. These are travelers who collapsed mid-journey, overcome by cold, hunger, or exhaustion. Now they lie where they fell, snow crusting their hair, lashes dusted white. Medieval sources mention scenes like this without flourish, as though they were expected parts of a season. People traveling to markets, pilgrims trudging to shrines, messengers carrying news, all could be overtaken by blizzards and never reach shelter. Without inns every few miles, many roads were dangerous even in fair weather. In winter, they became graveyards. You step carefully, your boots crunching close to a body curled against a milestone. His face is tilted upward, eyes open, frozen in surprise. A thin beard glitters with frost. His pack is still strapped tight to his back, contents unknown but likely worthless now. The silence around him is terrible, broken only by the faint creak of branches overhead. What do villagers do when they find such corpses? In some places, records say, bodies were hauled back to churches for burial, if the ground could be broken. But more often, travelers were covered with snow and left until thaw, then buried in spring when the earth softened. The thought chills you, a hidden multitude beneath the white fields, waiting silently until the sun's return. Strange details filter through stories. In Norway, some believed sudden death on a road meant the person was taken by a frost spirit, and travelers would place coins on the body to pay the cold before moving on. In alpine regions, passers-by left sprigs of evergreen tucked into stiff fingers, a token of hope for eternal warmth. These gestures seem small, but they soften the starkness, little human rebellions against the inhuman freeze. The debate among historians is whether winter mortality on the roads shaped travel customs, like the building of more hospices and shelters. Some argue monastic orders expanded roadside hostels in direct response to such deaths. Others think it was coincidence, charity not crisis. Regardless, for you walking past the frozen bodies, it feels obvious. Every lifeless figure here is a testament to the need for refuge. You imagine the last moments. A traveller stumbles, snow blinding, wind cutting like blades, their feet numb, their stomach empty, their will cracking under the weight of endless white. They sit down, just for a moment, pulling their cloak tighter, intending to rise again after resting. But sleep comes swiftly, deceptively gentle, and in the morning they are stone. You shiver, because the temptation feels familiar. You too long to stop walking sometimes. At the next village, people whisper about a merchant who never arrived, a bride who vanished en route to her wedding, a pilgrim who set out with songs but now lies silent in the fields. The stories pile like snowdrifts, each name fading into another. Yet life continues, wood still chopped, broth still stirred. Death is mourned, but also folded into routine, as inevitable as frost on windows. The sensory world is stark. You smell little beyond smoke on the wind, and the faint iron tang near the bodies. You hear crows croak from branches, already waiting. You see the pale sky pressing down, a colourless dome over colourless land. Even touch betrays you. Fingers numb, cloak stiff, boots heavy with frozen slush. Everything conspires to remind you how thin the line is between moving and lying still. Night comes quickly, and you huddle in the hut with others. Someone mutters about the corpses outside, their voices low as if fearing to draw the same fate upon themselves. A grandmother spits 3 times into the fire, a charm against sudden death on the road. A boy, restless, asks why the bodies freeze so stiff. No one answers. The silence says enough. And yet, even here, rituals of care emerge. A group of villagers decide to mark each body found with a small wooden cross planted in the snow, so travelers know to tread carefully. You picture a road lined with crosses, each one a warning and a memorial. It is a grim landscape, but it is also a map of survival, showing where winter has already claimed its toll. When spring comes, Thor will reveal them all. The snow will melt, the fields turn green, and beneath the new life will be the remnants of those who did not endure. They will be buried then, with hurried prayers and shallow graves, the earth still half frozen. And in years to come, their names will fade, but the memory of their frozen faces will linger in the minds of those who passed them on the road. You turn from the window, cloak tight, and whisper to yourself, keep walking, for in these winters, stopping even once may mean you never move again. The night is still, but your ears prick at a sound that does not belong to the creak of trees or the whistle of wind. A low, drawn-out howl floats across the snow, eerie and rising, answered by another from the opposite ridge. Wolves. You know the sound instantly, for it carries a primal weight. Every villager fears it when the cold drags food out of the forests and drives predators closer to human doors. You step outside the hut, breath hanging heavy in the frozen air. At the edge of the fields, shadows shift against the white. Shapes move sleek, low, grey bodies slipping between trees, glowing eyes catching starlight. They are hungrier than you, their ribs sharp beneath winter coats, their paws padding silent except when they break crusted snow. The livestock are penned, but the wolves know hunger breeds boldness. Medieval chronicles make frequent mention of wolf attacks during harsh winters. Herds of sheep or goats could be wiped out overnight, and lone travelers stood little chance. Some records even describe wolves stalking the outskirts of towns, waiting for the weakest to stray. To peasants already starving, the beasts were more than predators. They were omens of winter's cruelty incarnate. You imagine standing in the dark with only a staff in your hands, listening as the howls circle closer. The animals in the byre stamp nervously, breath steaming, hooves clattering on frozen floors. Dogs bark frantically, hackles raised. Inside the hut, children cling to their mothers, eyes wide at the chorus building outside. The line between wild and human feels fragile, only a wooden fence separating survival from intrusion. And yet, curious details remind you that fear was not universal. In some Slavic regions, villagers left offerings, bones, scraps of meat on the forest's edge, hoping wolves would be satisfied and turn away. There are even folk tales of wolves seen as protectors, spirits who punished greed but rewarded kindness. Imagine slipping into the dark with a scrap of bread, tossing it into the snow, whispering a bargain into the night. Half superstition, half desperate gamble. Scholars continue to argue over how real the danger was. Were wolves truly bold enough to attack villages, or did famine-weakened people exaggerate their menace? Some believe wolf numbers did swell during colder centuries, their prey scarce in deep snow. Others suggest fear magnified sightings into legends. Whatever the truth, the sound of howling in the night was enough to still any song and silence any laughter. The sensory atmosphere of such nights is unforgettable. You smell the acrid sweat of animals panicking in their pens, hear the sharp clatter of hooves, feel the tension crackle in the air like fire about to spark. Your own heartbeat thunders louder than the howls. Your fingers tighten on the staff until your knuckles ache. The cold presses closer, sharper, as though eager to join forces with the predators outside. At times, wolves became symbols of social collapse. Records from France in the 15th century describe wolf years when so many children were lost to hunger that rumors spread of wolves carrying them off. Whether true or not, the image stuck. The beast waiting just beyond the hearth, ready to devour weakness. For peasants, it was as much a moral lesson as a real threat. Keep strong, keep vigilant, or be taken. You stand guard until the night deepens, your breath ragged. Now and then, a pair of eyes gleams closer, then retreats. A snarl cuts through the air, low and guttural, answered by dogs barking madly. But the wolves do not break through tonight. They linger, circle, test, then vanish into the trees as silently as they came. The silence afterward is almost worse, for you know they will return. Inside, the hut smells of smoke and fear. Families whisper prayers, cross themselves, or mutter charms against beasts. A child asks if wolves can slip down chimneys like demons. The grandmother shakes her head, but her eyes flick nervously at the smoke hole in the roof. In a world where frost and famine already kill, the thought of fangs waiting outside is almost too much to bear. Yet not all encounters end in dread. One curious story, noted in a northern English parish, tells of wolves trailing armies during a winter siege, feeding on the dead left frozen in fields. Soldiers grew used to their presence, even joked about the beasts as camp followers. A grisly companionship, but companionship nonetheless. Such anecdotes blur the line between terror and acceptance, reminding you that survival often means learning to live alongside fear. By dawn, frost glitters on the ground like scattered glass. You find paw prints near the byre, sharp and distinct in the snow. The animals inside are restless but alive. Relief washes over you, though it is tempered by the knowledge that the struggle is not finished. The wolves are hungry still, and so are you. Both species circle each other warily, each waiting for weakness in the other. You tuck your staff against your shoulder and step back inside, where the fire smoulders low and the air is thick with fatigue. Children are asleep again, their breaths shallow but steady. Adults sit in silence, staring into embers, listening for another howl. It does not come, not tonight. But the memory of those voices in the dark lingers, reminding you that in the harshest winters you are never the only one fighting to survive. You wake early, hoping to hear the peal of bells across the valley. Bells were more than sound, they were the heartbeat of a community, calling villagers to prayer, marking feast days, tolling warnings. But this morning, when you pull the rope in the church tower, nothing happens. The cord jerks in your hands, stiff and unyielding, and you realize the great bronze bell above has frozen solid in its frame. Ice has locked the clapper, frost has swollen the wood, and the tongue of the church stands silent. It's a strange kind of silence, Without bells, the day feels unmoored, time itself uncertain. In the Middle Ages, bells told farmers when to rise, when to work, when to pray. Monks timed their chants by them. Villagers measured market hours through their tolling. Without that rhythm, the community seems adrift, left to stumble through the grey morning without direction. Medieval accounts mention such incidents, bells sealed by ice during brutal winters. One chronicle from Flanders describes ropes snapping in men's hands because the moisture froze fibres stiff as iron. Another notes clappers stuck so firmly that hammers had to be swung directly against the bell's side to raise a sound. Imagine the dull clang of iron on bronze, a weak imitation of the voice that usually thundered over fields. But bells carried symbolic weight as well. They were believed to drive away storms, demons, even plague. To lose their sound was to lose protection. Villagers stood outside churches, staring up at towers rimmed with icicles, whispering that God had turned his face. You can almost feel their unease as the silence deepens, as though the whole world has forgotten how to breathe. Curious customs arose to combat this muteness. In parts of France, villagers lit bonfires at the base of bell towers, hoping heat would thaw frozen clappers. In other places, boys were sent up ladders to hack away ice with axes, each strike echoing like a desperate prayer. One odd note from a parish record tells of people pouring hot wine over the frozen bell tongue, a costly sacrifice meant to coax the voice of heaven back into the air. The sensory image is vivid. Picture the bell tower looming grey against a pale sky, icicles hanging like daggers from the eaves. The rope in your hands feels stiff, crusted with frost, fibres biting into your palms. You hear the creak of wood, the crackle of ice, but no resounding chime. Instead, there's only the shuffle of boots in snow, the cough of a man waiting for mass, the restless whimper of a child tugging at her mother's cloak. Scholars have long wondered whether the silence of bells in these winters deepened the psychological toll of cold. Was it mere inconvenience, or did it erode morale, making famine and sickness heavier? Some suggest the absence of bells reinforced the sense of divine abandonment. Others think villagers quickly adapted, finding rhythm in the sun's rise and set. You, standing in the shadow of a mute tower, feel the loss like a hollow in your chest. The world feels unfinished without the resonance of bronze. And yet, improvisation persists. A priest calls for wooden clappers, simple boards struck together to summon the faithful. The sound is thin, more like cracking branches than holy summons. But villagers come anyway, stomping snow from boots as they file inside. The church smells of damp wool and candle wax, air heavy with breath and murmured prayers. The service is quieter than usual, words falling flat without bells to crown them, but it happens all the same. Faith limps forward, even when its instruments freeze. Later, children creep into the tower, daring each other to touch the frozen bronze with their tongues. One does, and yelps as skin sticks to the metal. Laughter ripples through the group, a sharp sound in the muffled morning. Even in silence, the bell becomes a focus, a reminder of both danger and community. Night falls, and frost deepens. You sit in your hut, hearing not the toll of bells but the howl of wind. The absence presses on you, as though the village itself has gone voiceless. But when you close your eyes, you remember past seasons, the warm summer mornings when bells rang clear, the autumn feasts where bronze thundered like joy itself. Those memories are enough to carry you through another night. And then, one morning weeks later, thaw comes just enough. The rope loosens, the clapper swings, and a deep note rolls across the valley. The sound startles you, a vibration felt in your bones, as though the earth itself had woken. Villagers stop in their tracks, faces lifting, tears bright on cheeks. For the first time in weeks, the air feels alive. In that moment, you understand why silence had felt like death. The bell's return is more than sound, it is proof that the season will not last forever, that spring will break through eventually, that voices frozen will ring again. You are sitting by the hearth, scraping the bottom of a clay bowl for the last streaks of broth, when the knock comes. A steward from the manor strides in, his cloak dusted white, his boots clean enough to show he has not trudged through fields like the rest of you. His voice is clipped, formal, carrying the weight of authority. The Lord requires more grain. Taxes are due. Arrears must be cleared. The tithe cannot be delayed, even if the barns are already empty. You look around the hut. The few sacks of grain left are thin, their sides sagging, contents gritty with ground acorns to stretch the flour. Families have been living on crusts and cabbage water for weeks. The idea of surrendering even a handful feels impossible. Yet the steward stands there, parchment in hand, waiting. Winter's cruelty is doubled by the cruelty of men. Documents from the early 14th century show a harsh truth. Even during famine winters, lords often demanded rents in kind grain, livestock, wool. Many refused to lower dues, insisting that hardship was divine punishment, not their concern. To them, peasants were tenants bound to obligations. To the villagers, it felt like robbery in daylight, sanctioned by law. You hand over what you must, even though your stomach growls at the sight of it. The steward records it with a flourish of ink, his quill scratching like claws. He does not look at the children sitting thin and silent in the corner. His world is numbers and quotas, not faces and hunger. When he leaves, snow crunching under his boots, the room feels emptier than before. Some curious accounts hint at small rebellions. Villagers in Flanders once filled sacks with sand to make them appear heavy, hoping stewards would not notice until later. Others hid stores under floorboards, trusting neighbors with the secret. One tale tells of women distracting tax collectors with feigned sickness while men smuggled sacks through the back door. These gestures were dangerous, for discovery meant punishment, yet desperation breeds daring. The debate among historians is whether noble households truly understood the depth of peasant suffering. Some argue lords were insulated, eating well in stone halls while famine raged outside. Others suggest they too felt the pinch, their incomes falling when trade collapsed. Whatever the case, the image that lingers is this: peasants scraping by, still asked to surrender what little kept them alive. The fairness of it was never in question, it was simply enforced. The sensory details of such transactions are bitter. The smell of stale grain as the sack is dragged across the floor, dust rising into the smoky air. The sound of the steward's quill scratching, unbothered by the silence of hollow stomachs. The touch of cold coins pressed into your palm if payment is accepted, the metal biting against your skin, useless for filling bellies. Even the sight of the parchment, neat lines against chaos, feels mocking. You step outside, clutching your cloak, watching the steward disappear back toward the manor. Behind him, the smoke of noble hearths rises thick and steady, a reminder that someone will feast tonight. In your hut, the pot will hold only water and roots. The contrast is sharp enough to sting. And yet, villagers endure. They share what is left, pooling scraps to make one thin stew rather than 3 empty bowls. They chew bark for fiber, boil nettles into greenish soup, scrape lichen from rocks. Children gnaw on hardened crusts as if they were treasures. The bitterness is sharp, but at least it fills. Later, whispers spread through the village. A group has decided to hide grain before the next collection, burying it in sealed clay pots beneath the snow. You join them in the night, shoveling quickly, breath fogging, ears straining for footsteps. The earth is hard, your hands numb, but the thought of saving even a handful for your children spurs you on. You cover the spot carefully, stamping the snow flat, praying it will remain hidden. There is a grim irony. The same lords who demand grain also rely on peasants to survive. Without their labor, no fields would be ploughed, no harvests gathered. Yet power flows upward, never down. You feel it each time you bend your back to the steward's command. The church offers some solace, but even tithes are demanded. Priests remind you that offerings to God cannot be withheld, even when your belly is empty. You watch as coins and grain are laid on the altar, the faces of villagers hollow but obedient. Faith and fear blur together, making refusal unthinkable. Night comes, and the wind rattles the shutters. Inside the hut, the pot simmers faintly, steam carrying the faint scent of nettles. You sip slowly, pretending it satisfies, pretending the hunger clawing your ribs will ease. Outside, the manor windows glow warmly, their silhouettes feasting behind stone. You turn your face from it, focusing on the fire's faint flicker instead. In time, spring will soften the ground, seeds will be sown again, and lords will claim their share anew. But for now, you sit in silence, your body heavy with fatigue, your stomach hollow, your spirit held upright by nothing more than stubbornness. Winter has taken much, but still you remain. One breath, one sip, one step at a time. You make your way to the coast, hoping for some sense of movement in this world locked by ice. The air grows sharper, salt riding on the wind, and you expect the roar of waves. But when you crest the final dune, your breath catches. The sea is frozen. Not entirely dark water still churns in the distance, but the shoreline lies in white slabs, jagged flows grinding against each other, and ships sit trapped as though imprisoned by crystal chains. The sight is surreal. Fishing boats lean at odd angles, hulls wedged into the ice, sails stiff with frost. Men stand on the frozen surface with axes, hacking at the prison around their vessels, each strike ringing like iron on stone. The ice splinters but does not yield. They shout to each other, breath pluming, curses snatched away by the wind. The sea has turned traitor, locking them in place when they need it most. Contemporary records mention winters when northern seas froze as far as the eye could see, stranding fleets and starving coastal towns. Baltic ports lost trade, herring rotted in nets, and merchants stared helplessly at cargo ships frozen mid-voyage. In England, chronicles note the Thames estuary itself icing over, ships marooned miles from dock. To coastal people, the sea was lifeblood. To see it seized by winter was like watching your own veins turn to stone. You walk onto the ice cautiously, boots slipping on patches glazed clear as glass. The air smells faintly metallic, mixed with salt, a strange blend of sea and frost. You hear the groan of shifting flows, low and eerie, as though the ocean itself complains beneath its suffocating lid. Somewhere, a crack reverberates, sharp enough to make you freeze mid-step, heart-pounding. And yet, people adapt. Merchants drag sledges across the ice where barges once floated, hauling barrels of grain or wine. Fishermen cut holes with axes, dropping lines into black water below, pulling up flapping fish whose scales glitter like coins against snow. It is not abundance, but it is something. The scene feels like a parody of normal trade commerce carried out on a stage of frozen salt water, every step dangerous, every sound a warning. One curious anecdote survives from Hanseatic records. Sailors stranded by ice-brewed ale on the frozen decks of their ships, using timbers for fuel. They drank it warm, laughing in defiance of their prison. Another tale speaks of a ship's crew who staged a mock fair on the floes, carving chessboards into ice and gambling with pebbles while waiting for thaw. These fragments of humor feel out of place, yet they reveal how people clung to normalcy when nature stripped it away. Scholars have long argued whether such sea freezes were purely climatic or amplified by human perception. Did oceans truly ice over miles at a stretch? Or did coastal folk exaggerate the novelty? Evidence of icebound harbours, however, seems convincing. Whatever the scale, the impact was real. Starvation inland when fish failed, bankruptcy for merchants when cargo spoiled, despair in villages where sea meant sustenance. The sensory details press in on you. The cold wind scours your face, sharper than inland gusts. The ice underfoot is slick, your balance precarious. You hear gulls crying overhead, their wings stark against the white horizon, as though mocking the stillness below. The taste of salt hangs on your lips, dry and bitter. The frozen sea feels alien, untrustworthy, and yet eerily beautiful, its fractured surface glinting like broken mirrors in the weak sun. At night, Stranded sailors huddle on their ships, lanterns swaying faintly, their glow trapped in curtains of frost on rigging. The creak of wood carries across the stillness, a sound normally hidden by waves. Men sit close together, whispering prayers or telling jokes too tired to be funny, waiting for the ice to shift. Some carve talismans from bone, scratching crosses or animal shapes to hang on ropes for luck, anything to feel a measure of control. Meanwhile, villagers on shore ration dwindling fish. Smoked herring once filled barrels in every cottage, but now there is little to eat but scraps. A woman boils seawater to make brine, hoping to preserve the few catches left. The smell is pungent, sharp in the nostrils, but she presses on, knowing each jar may be the difference between hunger and survival. Children beg for fish bones to chew, pretending the marrow is enough. And yet, even here, there is resilience. When a thaw finally comes, it begins with distant groans, long rumbles as cracks zigzag through the floes. Ice shatters into chunks, water surges, and ships rock violently as though waking from sleep. Men scramble to free sails, voices rising with relief and fear. The sea is restless again, and though it brings danger, it also brings life. Nets can be cast, trade can resume, fish can fill bellies. The prison has broken. You watch from the shore, heart pounding at the spectacle of ice breaking into thunderous sheets. Spray rises, freezing instantly on beards and cloaks. The smell of salt surges strong. The sound of waves rushing back fills your ears. And in that chaos, hope stirs fragile, fleeting, but real. You turn from the shore, trudging back toward the village, knowing tomorrow there may be fish in the pot again, merchants in the square again, voices raised not in despair but in trade. Winter is still merciless, but the frozen sea is cracked, and in that fracture, you glimpse possibility. You sit in the dim glow of the hearth, pulling at the frayed edges of your cloak. No matter how tightly you wrap it, the cold finds a way in, sliding under fabric and gnawing at your bones. Clothing in these winters is not fashion but armor, improvised and endlessly patched. What you wear may decide whether you see spring. Descriptions from household accounts remind us how basic most wardrobes were. Wool tunics, linen underclothes, cloaks heavy with grease to shed snow. Fur, when available, lined collars or cuffs, but for most it was far too costly. So peasants grew inventive. You watch as your neighbor stuffs straw into the gaps of his shoes, binding them with strips of leather. Another packs moss between his tunic and skin, a prickly but insulating layer. The itch is nothing compared to the chill it keeps at bay. Curious details emerge from archaeological finds. In Scandinavia, mittens have been discovered sewn from multiple scraps, wool pieced together like patchwork. In the Alps, remains show shoes lined with grass, woven tightly to trap heat. Imagine slipping such footwear on, hearing the faint rustle with each step, feeling dry stalks prick your skin, but walking more easily on icy paths because of it. Ingenuity stitched survival thread by thread. The sensory details are sharp. Cloaks smell of sheep's lanolin, pungent and oily. Mittens reek faintly of smoke, absorbing the odor of countless nights by the fire. Boots stiffen overnight, frozen into shapes that must be beaten soft before worn again. You feel fabric scratch against skin, stiff and heavy, yet without it, you would freeze within minutes. Comfort is not the goal, function is. Among nobles, clothing told a different story. Chronicles describe velvet gowns lined with ermine, boots of supple leather, hats trimmed with fox fur. These garments were as much display as defense, symbols of wealth parading through frost. But even there, the cold bit through. Records mention nobles wearing multiple cloaks at banquets, fur-lined gloves even when eating. Stone castles trapped chill in their very walls. Luxury softened but did not erase it. One odd tidbit preserved in English accounts. Some households wove dog hair into their garments, believing it warmer than sheep's wool. Another quirky solution was stuffing feathers between layers of cloth, creating crude quilts long before down jackets existed. You imagine rustling as you move, feathers escaping into the air, but grateful warmth pressing close nonetheless. Scholars today discuss whether medieval clothing was truly sufficient for the harsher centuries of the Little Ice Age. Some argue that layering, grease, and ingenuity made it bearable. Others believe people simply endured constant cold, surviving not by comfort but by resilience. Both explanations feel true as you shift in your seat, cloak heavy but chill still finding your toes. The act of dressing itself became ritual. Families rose early to beat stiffness from boots, to sew patches by faint light, to rub cloaks with grease or wax. Children were wrapped in every scrap available, emerging like bundles of rags, noses peeking out from layers. You picture mothers tugging scarves tighter, fathers adjusting belts to keep tunics closed, each gesture an act of care as much as necessity. And there was beauty, even in hardship. Embroidery brightened hems, colours persisted in stripes of wool, charms were sewn into cuffs for luck. Clothes were practical but personal, carrying the mark of the hands that stitched them. You run your fingers over uneven seams, feel the rough thread, and know that someone fought for your warmth with needle and patience. The soundscape of winter dress is subtle, the rustle of straw inside shoes, the snap of frozen wool as it bends, the faint jingle of a metal clasp striking against belt. When you move, you feel bulkier, heavier, slower, yet each layer is a shield, and you carry it gratefully. At night, garments doubled as bedding. Cloaks were spread across straw pallets, boots tucked close to fires to thaw. Children slept in tunics they had worn all day, bodies cocooned in layers of smoke-scented fabric. Waking meant peeling yourself reluctantly from warmth, slipping stiff shoes back on, and bracing for the icy air beyond the hut. Even festivals in winter carried their mark. On Candlemas or Yuletide, villagers donned their best cloaks, still patched, still plain, but perhaps brighter with dye or edged with fur. You see the pride in their faces, the determination to carve dignity from rags. Clothing was not just about warmth, it was about identity, proof that even in hunger and frost, people could still show themselves as more than victims of weather. When you finally crawl into bed, you do not shed your tunic. You keep it on, keep everything on, wrapping yourself tight. The straw rustles, the fabric scratches, but you are grateful for every layer. Outside, the wind hisses against the shutters, searching for cracks. Inside, your patchwork cloak holds the line, thin but stubborn, like you. You descend into the cellar, lantern trembling in your hand, and the cold hits you like a wall. It is not the damp chill of autumn storage, but a biting freeze so sharp that your breath fogs even in this underground chamber. You had come hoping for comfort, for the sight of casks and barrels standing firm, but instead you find silence and frost. The wine has turned to ice. Barrels that should slosh heavy with liquid now echo hollowly when tapped. You prise open a lid and peer inside. The surface is crystalline, pale shards catching the flicker of your light. What once was rich red wine is now a frozen slush, useless for feasting or trade. In noble halls, this is embarrassment. In villages, it is catastrophe, for wine is not just drink but medicine, ritual, and preserved sustenance when water runs foul. Chroniclers describe this with quiet astonishment. In years of brutal cold, even deep cellars could not protect wine or ale. Monks complained that sacramental wine congealed, forcing them to thaw it near altars before Mass. Tavern accounts mention customers served half-frozen cups, slurping thick liquid like syrup. Imagine holding such a cup, watching steam rise faintly as it is warmed at the hearth, sipping it like a bitter broth rather than a drink of celebration. And beer fared little better. In some towns, casks cracked as ice expanded, spilling precious stores onto cellar floors. The smell must have been dreadful, sweet, sour, sticky alcohol soaking into straw, wasted. For peasants, this was more than inconvenience. It was the loss of calories in liquid form, a staple when bread was scarce. There are odd anecdotes of survival too. One German village supposedly ate wine ice like a sweet, scooping slush into bowls and mixing it with herbs. Another tale mentions tavern keepers advertising winter beer, thick as porridge, drunk with spoons. It sounds comical, but behind it lies desperation. Anything that could be swallowed was food, even if it dripped half frozen from a barrel. Modern climate historians see such records as clear signs of the colder centuries of the so-called Little Ice Age. They argue that when cellars usually constant in temperature failed to protect wine, the climate was not merely cold but extreme. Others suggest exaggeration by clerks eager to underline divine wrath. Yet whether literal or symbolic, the frozen cask became a powerful image. Abundance turned brittle, plenty sealed under ice. The sensory experience is unforgettable. You smell the faint tang of sour wine on the air, sharp enough to sting the nose. You hear the creak of staves under pressure, wood groaning as ice pushes outward. You feel frost on your fingertips when you brush the barrel's rim, slick and biting. And you taste disappointment. No warmth of mulled wine tonight. No laughter around mugs. Only the sting of cold water fetched from a frozen well. Above ground, people adapt. Monks heat small portions of wine for mass, even if it tastes smoky from the fire. Tavern keepers chop casks open and serve slush by the ladle. Families brew weak substitutes from roots, berries, or boiled bark, grimly toasting with cups that offer more hope than flavor. And yet, in noble halls, wine still flows. How? Because wealth buys cellars dug deeper, lined with stone, guarded from draughts. Guests sip from golden goblets while peasants gnaw bark bread. The irony bites harder than the wind outside. You think of those frozen casks again, stacked uselessly, and wonder how many throats will parch while they sit locked in ice. Still, even ruined stores can spark resilience. Hides are stripped from broken casks to patch roofs. The frozen wine is thawed and mixed into stews for flavor. Nothing is truly wasted, though nothing feels whole. You picture yourself at a table, bowl in hand, steam rising from a thin soup tinged faintly red. The taste is strange, sour and earthy, but it warms your belly. That alone is enough. Later, you return to the cellar, lantern dimming, and glance once more at the frozen barrels. The silence down here feels heavier than above, as if time itself has paused. The air smells of damp wood and failed abundance. You touch the ice again, cold burning your skin, and realize that this season does not simply steal life, it mocks it, turning treasures into burdens, comfort into spectacle. When spring comes, the thaw will loosen the casks, liquid will flow again, and the taste of wine will return to tongues parched by winter. But for now, you climb the cellar stairs, footsteps slow, carrying the memory of frozen abundance like a weight. Above, the fire crackles faintly. You sit by it, sip hot water, and close your eyes. The cellar remains below, cold, mute, waiting. The winter night feels longer than any day should allow, and yet the calendar insists there are feast days still to be observed. Even in famine, even in frost, the rhythm of the church dictates that people gather, light candles, and sing. Tonight is one of those vigils. You walk with the others toward the chapel, cloaks pulled tight, breath rising in clouds, the snow crunching beneath 100 pairs of boots. Inside, the air is warmer, though only by degrees. Dozens of tallow candles line the altar, their flames wavering and dripping wax like golden tears. The smell is heavy, fatty smoke mingled with incense, but to your frozen lungs it feels almost sweet. Villagers cluster shoulder to shoulder, pressing close not just for warmth but for comfort. The chanting begins, low and steady, filling the chapel with rhythm that drowns out the moan of the wind outside. One detail recorded in liturgical notes reminds us how winter feasts were adapted to the cold. Candlemas, celebrated in February, was not only about the Virgin Mary, but also about blessing light itself. Priests handed out candles to families, who carried them home to keep fires alive. In times of endless dark, this ritual felt less symbolic and more practical, a transfer of flame to stave off despair. And yet, feasts were not purely solemn. Even in the harshest winters, people tried to carve joy into the gloom. During Yuletide, villagers gathered to share what little they had, singing carols in harmony. Some of these songs, preserved in manuscripts, reveal surprising humor verses poking fun at greedy lords, or jokes about sheep too thin to shear. Imagine sitting in a smoky hall, bellies growling, yet laughing at rhymes that make suffering feel momentarily lighter. Curious customs abound in chronicles. In parts of Germany, villagers baked small bread figures, even in famine, believing that sharing them ensured health for the year ahead. In Poland, families decorated their huts with evergreen branches, tokens of life amid death. And in England, mummers' plays were performed in barns, with men dressed as St. George or devils, stamping their feet on icy floors as the audience cheered. These scraps of festivity glimmer like sparks in a season otherwise defined by grey. Scholars today reflect on whether these winter rituals served more as spiritual sustenance than physical. Some argue they bound communities together, offering a shared rhythm of hope when days blurred. Others suggest the church simply maintained authority, insisting on feasts regardless of hunger. But to you, sitting among villagers in candlelight, the effect is undeniable. Warmth is created not only by fire, but by voices, by ritual, by the stubborn insistence that life continues. The sensory world of these vigils is vivid. The smoke of candles stings your eyes, yet the glow makes faces look softer. The chant vibrates through stone walls, deep enough to rattle in your chest. The floor is cold, but the press of bodies around you radiates heat. Someone passes a cup of mulled ale, thin and watery but flavored with a scrap of spice, cinnamon, perhaps, saved for this night alone. The taste lingers, strange and wonderful against your tongue. Outside, the wind shrieks across the village, but inside, voices rise higher. A hymn swells, the Latin words rolling into harmony, half understood yet fully felt. Children hum along, mothers rock babies. Old men close their eyes and lean against pews. For a brief hour, the hunger is forgotten, the frost ignored. All that exists is light, sound, and the fragile hope they kindle together. One odd note found in a 15th century diary tells of villagers processing through snow with lanterns, circling the fields 3 times to wake the soil beneath the frost. Picture it. Dozens of flickering lights weaving through white fields, breath steaming, chants mingling with the crunch of snow. It is as though people believed they could sing spring into arriving sooner. Perhaps they did, for even rituals can stir the will to endure. When the service ends, you step outside again. The stars are sharp above, the cold fiercer than ever. Yet you feel steadier, as if the candles still burn inside you. Villagers walk home together, voices hushed but warm, children skipping despite the snow. The huts waiting for them are still cold, the cupboards still nearly bare, but the memory of song lingers like embers in the heart. You crawl under your blanket that night, still humming the tune, the scent of incense clinging faintly to your clothes. The wind rattles the shutters, but you close your eyes and see the candles burning, endless flames against endless dark. And in that vision, sleep finally comes. The pot on the hearth bubbles faintly, though what simmers inside would hardly be called a meal. You lean closer, sniffing the steam, and find only a vague, earthy scent more bark than broth. Someone stirs with a wooden ladle, lifting out a shred of leather softened by boiling, then dropping it back with a sigh. This is what survival food looks like in a winter where granaries are empty and hunting yields little. Chronicles from famine years record recipes so desperate they read almost like parodies. In England during the Great Famine, peasants ground acorns into flour, leaching them in streams to strip poison before baking flat, bitter cakes. In France, bark was shaved from trees, boiled until it became a pulpy mash. In Scandinavia, shoes past their use were cut into strips, boiled, and chewed for the faint trace of animal fat still trapped in the leather. Imagine gnawing such a strip, its taste acrid and stringy, yet swallowing anyway because hunger is louder than disgust. And yet, there is creativity even in desperation. One quirky note from a German village account describes people boiling nettles into green porridge, which, despite its bitter tang, actually carried vitamins that may have saved lives. Another record from Italy mentions broth made from roasted chestnut shells, ground and steeped in water to create something resembling coffee centuries before coffee arrived. These experiments sound eccentric, but when your stomach aches daily, innovation becomes instinct. The sensory experience of these meals is stark. The smell is often sour, woody, unfamiliar. The texture in your mouth ranges from gritty to slimy. The taste lingers unpleasantly, yet the warmth spreading down your throat brings relief. Your body doesn't care about flavor anymore. It cares about calories, however they arrive. Families sat in circles around thin soups, sharing evenly. Children were given the thickest portions, adults sipping mostly hot water. Silence often filled the hut, broken only by the scrape of spoons against clay bowls. There was no chatter, no songs, only the slow rhythm of eating, every mouthful measured against what was left in the pot. Scholars debate how widespread these survival foods truly were. Were they everyday practices across Europe, or desperate measures in only the worst-stricken regions? Some argue that famine cuisine became common knowledge, passed between generations as cautionary tales. Others insist these meals were rare, extreme exceptions. Either way, the written fragments that survive remind us how far humans will bend before breaking. Still, not all meals were so bleak. When possible, villages found ways to make even scraps feel festive. Dried peas, boiled until soft, were mashed with a hint of onion or garlic, transforming into something closer to stew than gruel. Bones, once stripped of meat, were boiled again and again until the water turned milky, creating thin but nourishing stock. Bread crusts were toasted over coals, rubbed with garlic, and eaten slowly as though they were luxuries. These tiny touches of care mattered, not only for the body but for the spirit. One odd anecdote from monastic records describes brothers flavoring thin beer with pine needles during a particularly brutal winter. They claimed it eased coughs and brightened mood. Whether placebo or discovery of vitamin C, it added another layer to the strange catalogue of winter recipes. Imagine sipping such resin-flavored brew, bitter and sharp, but strangely invigorating against the cold. The hut fills with smells: wood smoke, cabbage boiled to mush, bark broth earthy as soil. You swallow each spoonful, eyes closed, imagining it tastes of roasted meat or fresh bread. The mind, too, adapts, weaving illusions to ease the body's burden. Hunger, it turns out, is as much in the head as the stomach. There were darker rumors as well. Chronicles whisper of people eating cats, dogs, even the flesh of horses long dead. Some accounts hint at cannibalism, though whether literal or exaggerated as moral warning remains uncertain. The fact that such whispers existed at all shows how far survival could push the desperate. You shiver, gripping your bowl tighter, grateful at least for bark broth tonight. Outside, the snow falls again, thick and steady. You can smell it, sharp and clean, when the door opens briefly. It makes the hut's soup seem even more precious, a small flame of warmth in a world gone white. You huddle closer to the fire, bowl against your lips, and drink every drop. When the pot is empty, families lick spoons, scrape sides, even chew the softened wood of the ladle for its faint flavor. Nothing is wasted. Children fall asleep quickly, their bodies grateful for warmth no matter how meager. Adults stay awake longer, staring into embers, planning tomorrow's meals, wondering what else might be boiled, roasted, or steeped into survival. And so, the winter continues. Each day brings another experiment in subsistence, another memory of meals that would horrify in better years but sustain in these. Bark, nettles, bones, leather, all transformed into lifelines. It is not feasting, not even dining. It is persistence, one strange recipe at a time. The frost may gnaw at your toes, and the broth may taste of bark, but one thing the cold cannot fully extinguish is the flicker of human warmth that springs up when people gather together. Tonight, you step into a barn swept clear of hay, where villagers have lit torches along the beams and scattered pine branches across the floor. Despite hunger, despite fear, they are holding a festival. And amid the shivering bodies and thin laughter, you notice something even rarer: courtship. It seems almost absurd that romance could bloom in a winter like this, yet it does. In fact, the season almost encourages it. Harsh nights drive people to huddle close, and proximity becomes possibility. You watch as young men and women shuffle into circles, stamping their boots to keep blood flowing, cheeks flushed not only from cold but from glances exchanged in firelight. The music begins just a fiddle and a drum, but it echoes lively in the rafters, transforming the drafty barn into something almost joyful. Contemporary records of village life mention winter festivals where marriages were often arranged or romances sparked. Long, dark nights demanded distractions, and shared hardship created bonds. Candlemas, Yuletide, or simply a pause in the season's grind, all offered excuses to dance, to sing, to notice someone else's smile in the glow of fire. You see it now. A boy clumsily offers a girl a cup of hot ale, thin but flavored with a scrap of spice. She laughs, the sound bright as bells that froze weeks ago. They step into the circle, hands brushing, eyes shy but eager. Around them, elders watch with faint smiles. They know that survival depends not only on food but on the forging of futures. New unions mean new hope. Quaint customs filtered into these gatherings. In some regions, young women carried sprigs of evergreen to symbolize fertility, even in winter. In others, men offered simple gifts: a carved wooden spoon, a scrap of ribbon saved from summer markets. These were not jewels or gold, but tokens of affection crafted with patience. You imagine slipping such a gift into someone's hand, their eyes lighting up as though it were treasure. The sensory world is vivid. Smoke curls in the barn rafters, mingling with the smell of pine branches crushed under boots. The fiddle squeals, raw but steady, while the drum thumps like a heartbeat. Cloaks sway as dancers spin slowly, laughter ringing through the cold. You feel the warmth of bodies pressed close, shoulders brushing, breath mingling in the frosty air. Romance, in such moments, feels less like luxury and more like survival itself. Scholars reflect on whether such winter gatherings were truly romantic or simply practical occasions to ensure marriages continued, to stabilize communities thinned by famine. Some argue the social function outweighed the personal. Others believe that genuine affection often blossomed in these settings, proving that even necessity cannot smother the heart. The truth, as always, likely weaves between the two. There are stories, too, that carry humor. A diary from 15th century England recounts a dance where a boy slipped on frost mid-step and knocked over three girls, creating a tangle of cloaks and laughter that turned into courtship by spring. Another tale tells of a girl who challenged her suitor to fetch her a ribbon from the manor kitchens. He returned not with ribbon but with a stolen chicken, which the whole group roasted together in secret. In lean times, even love had to improvise. You sit on a bench, watching the young couples whirl, your own heart softening. For a while you forget the cold outside, the silence of frozen fields. Here, there is warmth, not from fire alone but from the way eyes meet, hands clasp, voices mingle in song. The barn is alive in a way the huts never are, alive with possibility. Later in the evening the music slows, candles gutter low, shadows stretch long across the pine-strewn floor. Couples sit together on hay bales, sharing cloaks, whispering words you cannot hear. A girl rests her head on a boy's shoulder, and you feel the ache of tenderness. It is not just hunger that defines these winters, not just frost and famine. It is also the small rebellions of love, the refusal to let the season claim everything. When the gathering ends, People trudge homeward, boots crunching in snow, voices hushed but light. Some walk in pairs now, hands brushing in the dark. You follow, heart warmer than your cloak allows, and realize that in the bleakest of winters, romance was not frivolous, it was fuel. To find love in frost was to declare, silently but firmly, that life would continue. You curl into bed that night, still hearing the fiddle, still seeing firelight on smiling faces. Hunger gnaws, frost presses, but your dreams are of laughter, of hands brushing, of futures promised in barns filled with smoke and pine. For once, the cold feels less invincible. The snow outside is piled higher than a man's head, and yet the clash of iron still echoes across the valley. A castle, perched on a rocky rise, is under siege not in the lush days of summer, but in the dead grip of winter. You trudge closer, boots crunching on frozen ground, and see the scene unfold. Soldiers huddled in cloaks at the walls, breath fogging, ladders frozen stiff, cauldrons filled not with boiling oil, but with snow being melted desperately into water. Medieval chronicles note that sieges often dragged across seasons, and when winter descended mid-conflict, both attacker and defender suffered in ways that rarely made it into heroic ballads. The cold did not choose sides. Armies encamped outside walls froze in their tents, while defenders inside rationed dwindling stores. A winter siege was not only about steel and stone, but about who could outlast frost. Inside the castle, the situation is bleak. Fires burn in great halls, but wood is precious, and much of it is gone. Servants scrape together kindling from broken carts and torn beams. Bread grows thinner, stretched with husks, while salted meat dwindles. The well is choked with ice, so water must be hacked daily from its surface. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and desperation, a cloying mixture in stone chambers meant for grandeur. Outside, the besieging army huddles in tents pitched on frozen earth. Canvas stiffens into boards overnight, and men wake with frost in their beards, armor clinking brittle as glass. Horses paw uselessly at snow, searching for grass that does not exist. Soldiers gnaw at hard biscuits, breaking teeth, or warm hands around thin gruel that freezes if left unattended. Disease spreads as quickly as hunger, coughs rattling through the camp. Curious anecdotes tell of strange strategies born in these frozen standoffs. In one siege, defenders poured water down castle walls at night, letting it freeze into slick ice so attackers could not climb ladders. In another, soldiers hurled snowballs laced with stones, improvised missiles when arrows grew scarce. Chronicles even mention attackers tunneling under frozen moats, using fire to crack ice so they could cross, ingenious, though often futile. The sensory atmosphere is grim. You hear the creak of wood under strain, the groans of starving men, the muffled sobs of children hidden in castle chambers. You smell rancid meat too long stored, simmering into stews to disguise its spoil. You feel the bitter draught seeping through every crack in stone, reminding you that even castles are no refuge against winter. Scholarly debates continue about whether winter sieges were deliberate tactics or accidents of poor planning. Some historians argue commanders timed blockades to coincide with cold, knowing hunger would strike harder when fields lay barren. Others suggest armies simply miscalculated, trapped when campaigns stretched longer than expected. Either way, the result was misery for both sides. Endurance tested more than courage. And yet, even in these moments, resilience appears. Musicians in castles played lutes to keep spirits alive. Priests led processions around icy courtyards, chanting blessings to stave off despair. Outside, soldiers told bawdy tales by the fires, laughing through chattering teeth. Survival in siege was not only about rations, it was about keeping the mind from breaking. Night descends, and you walk the ramparts. The snow glows faintly under the moon, the besiegers' campfires flickering like distant stars across the field. The air is silent except for the occasional shout, the crack of wood splitting, the long howl of wolves drifting nearer. The castle feels like an island, the world beyond a hostile sea of white. You pull your cloak tighter, wondering how long walls can keep hunger out. Inside, families huddle in storerooms. Children chew strips of leather, pretending it is food. Women whisper lullabies, their voices quivering with fatigue. Men sharpen knives, not always for battle but sometimes to portion out what little remains. The fire burns low, embers dim, shadows stretching across stone walls. It feels less like a fortress than a tomb waiting to be sealed. And still dawn comes. The trumpets blare weakly. Soldiers muster, defenders stand at gates, attackers shuffle forward. Snow crunches under armored boots. Arrows whistle faintly before vanishing into drifts. The clash is half-hearted, slowed by cold, but it continues. Not because either side believes in victory today, but because stopping feels like surrender. Winter, more than steel, is the true enemy, testing each man's will one day at a time. When you finally retreat from the ramparts, the scene burns in your mind. Frozen moats, icy ladders, banners stiff as boards, men shivering under armor. You realize that medieval war was never glorious in winter, it was survival with swords. And in this siege, as in so many others, the outcome will not be decided by valor or strategy, but by which side has a log left for the fire, a crust left for the pot, a prayer left in the heart. You step into the dim light of the hall where villagers gather not to celebrate but to settle disputes. Winter presses everyone closer, and proximity sharpens quarrels. Food is short, tempers are shorter, and even the smallest slight can erupt into anger when survival feels precarious. Tonight, the fire in the hearth is not only for warmth but for justice, as neighbors face each other with words that cut sharper than blades. One man accuses another of stealing wood from his pile. Another claims his goat has been taken and slaughtered without permission. A woman insists her neighbor watered down the thin beer she bought at market, cheating her of precious pennies. The steward presides, quill scratching across parchment, recording grievances that echo louder in winter than in summer. In the season of hunger, every twig and every crust becomes worth fighting over. Contemporary manorial court rolls reveal just how common these conflicts were. Theft of firewood, poaching in the Lord's forest, disputes over shared wells all surged during harsh winters. People who might have shared gladly in autumn turned wary, even hostile, when supplies dwindled. Justice was rough. Fines, penances, sometimes public shaming. Yet records also note reconciliations. Neighbors mending fences because hatred could not keep you warm. You sit on a bench, listening to the arguments, the air thick with smoke and tension. The smell of damp wool and sweat lingers, mixed with the acrid tang of ink as the steward writes. The sounds overlap, boots stamping against cold, voices rising, children whining in the background. Survival has stripped life to essentials, and those essentials are scarce. Some tales show how absurd these disputes could become. One chronicler tells of two women nearly coming to blows over a turnip, each insisting she had planted it before the frost. Another record describes men fighting over frozen dung patties, prized as fuel. Imagine fists flying over manure, and you understand how desperate these seasons could make people. And yet, there is also solidarity. When sentences are given, villagers sometimes step forward to help the accused pay fines. One curious case from Normandy recounts a thief forgiven because he stole bread to feed his children, with the whole village contributing to cover the penalty. These glimpses reveal that compassion survived, flickering even under ice. Scholars today debate whether such records reflect true social collapse or simply the ordinary frictions of life exaggerated by famine. Some argue winter courts reveal how communities fractured under pressure. Others suggest they demonstrate resilience, a system flexing but not breaking. Standing in that smoky hall, you sense both are true. People fought, yes, but they also reconciled. Harsh words did not always mean permanent divisions. The sensory weight of the hall presses in. The fire crackles, but its warmth barely reaches the benches. Quills scratch. Voices mutter. The air tastes of soot. You feel your cloak heavy on your shoulders, your fingers numb despite gloves. Every sound seems sharper in the stillness outside, amplified by the silence of snow. When the session ends, villagers shuffle back into the night, their arguments unresolved but softened. Breath fogs in the air, boots crunch on ice, and slowly voices lower. In the dark, anger seems smaller, cold and hunger loom larger. You walk home with them, realizing that disputes are luxuries of the warm. In winter, survival makes enemies into uneasy allies. Later that night, around the hearth, families talk quietly. A mother scolds her son for stealing twigs, but then shares her bread with the neighbor's child. A man curses the steward for harshness, then lends his axe to the same neighbor he quarreled with hours before. Winter has a way of bending grudges into necessity. There is a phrase preserved in one chronicle: "Snow covers not only fields, but quarrels." The words ring true as you lie down to sleep. The cold demands cooperation, whether or not you like your neighbors. And though disputes will flare again tomorrow, tonight the village lies under the same frost, bound together by need. The wind rattles the shutters as you sit with a group of villagers around a low fire. The talk tonight is not of food or quarrels, but of signs in the sky. In harsh winters, people turn their eyes upward, searching for meaning in the heavens. With fields buried and rivers silent, the night sky becomes a kind of book, and every star, comet, or eclipse is read like a sentence of judgment. Someone swears they saw a halo around the moon last night, a pale ring of light. They say it means more snow is coming, a circle of frost written by unseen hands. Another insists the fiery streak of a falling star foretells famine deepening. Heads nod, murmurs ripple. These are not idle musings. They are survival tools, ways to prepare hearts for what the earth may soon deliver. Contemporary chronicles often blend astronomy with omen. A monk in France noted in his margin that a red moon arose and the frost deepened. In England, records mention that eclipses were viewed as portents of disaster, their sudden darkening tied to worsening winters. People feared the sky as much as they feared the earth beneath their feet, for it seemed to dictate fate with cold indifference. But not all interpretations were grim. In some alpine villages, the appearance of bright winter constellations, the Pleiades, Orion was greeted with songs, reminders that the heavens kept steady even when the world froze. Peasants warmed themselves by linking these stars to stories. Orion hunting wolves in the snow, the Pleiades as sisters carrying lanterns to guide spring back. Stories layered onto stars, weaving hope into the sky. Curious details appear in folklore. In the Low Countries, people tossed handfuls of grain toward the first star of the evening, believing it would hasten thaw. In Bohemia, villagers rang handbells during eclipses, shouting to wake the sun back to life. Imagine the sound of tinny bells clashing in snowy streets, children laughing nervously, adults praying that their clamor could undo cosmic silence. Modern scholars debate how literally these omens were believed. Some argue peasants and monks alike trusted celestial events as divine messages. Others claim they were symbolic shorthand, used to explain hardship when science offered no answers. Whatever the case, you sit there tonight, watching sparks rise from the fire toward the stars, and you feel the pull of those beliefs. How else can you explain winters that kill animals, freeze rivers, and steal food from mouths? Surely the sky must have something to say. The sensory scene around you is rich. Smoke curls into the rafters, its scent sharp and clinging. The fire crackles, sparks leaping like tiny stars. Outside, the air is still, muffled, the snow reflecting faint starlight so the night feels both bright and eerie. You feel the rough grain of wood under your fingers as you grip the bench, leaning forward to listen to the old man telling his tale of a comet that once blazed for days, followed by a famine so severe people ate moss from stones. His voice quavers, but everyone leans in, hanging on every word. Some tales mix awe with humor. A chronicle from Italy mentions villagers pelting snowballs at the sky during an eclipse, shouting that they would give the sun its fire back. Another account describes youths painting stars onto shutters with chalk to ensure good dreams during the longest nights. These gestures show not only fear but play, a refusal to let the cosmos rule unchallenged. The Church, of course, sought to control these interpretations. Priests preached that comets and eclipses were punishments for sin, urging confession and penance. Yet even they blended astronomy with folklore, noting celestial events in their annals alongside weather records. One monk wrote, "The moon was darkened, and frost broke men's hearts." Was it observation or omen? Likely both. You lie back later in the snow, staring up at the constellations. The cold bites your spine through layers of wool, but you stay still, eyes tracing patterns. Orion gleams bright, belt stars sharp against the black. You remember the story told earlier of him hunting wolves across the sky, and you imagine his arrows keeping the beasts from your hut. The Pleiades shimmer faintly, a cluster like sparks of hope. You whisper their names, or what passes for them in your tongue, and you feel less alone under the vast dome of winter. Perhaps the stars mean nothing, perhaps they mean everything. What matters is that they are there, steady when the earth is not. You close your eyes with the image burned onto your lids, and for a moment, frost feels less heavy. The heavens, indifferent though they may be, have given you a reason to keep watching, keep waiting, keep enduring. The cold does not only gnaw at bellies and toes, it seeps into the mind. As you sit in the dim light of the fire, you notice how people's tempers fray, how silences stretch, how eyes stare blankly at walls for hours. Winter is as much a battle of spirit as of body. You sense it in yourself too. The sluggishness, the heavy weight of days that feel identical, the creeping suspicion that spring may never return. In medieval records, such weariness is sometimes described as acedia, a spiritual heaviness. Monks in cloisters wrote of feeling paralyzed in the long, cold months, staring at their manuscripts without energy to move quills, hearts sinking under the sameness of grey skies. They called it sin, a temptation of sloth. But when you feel the same heaviness, you know it is simply the body's exhaustion under relentless frost. Villagers too felt this dull despair. With work impossible in frozen fields, time slowed. Men sat by hearths sharpening tools that would not be used for months. Women mended clothes until every patch had been patched again. Children grew restless, quarrelsome, bored. The silence outside pressed inward, filling huts with uneasy quiet. One curious entry from a parish record tells of snow madness. When villagers grew so restless, they staged mock parades through town, banging pots, singing nonsense verses, chasing away the silence with chaos. Another account mentions men carving grotesque faces into firewood, laughing as they burned them, as if mocking the frost itself. These antics, half play, half rebellion, broke the monotony before it could crush spirits completely. The sensory experience of this mental toll is strange. You hear fewer conversations, more sighs. You smell stale smoke clinging to everything, a scent that grows oppressive rather than comforting after months of confinement. You taste meals that all blur together, roots, broth, crusts, until flavor itself seems lost. Your body aches not only from cold but from stillness, every joint stiff, every muscle restless. Scholars continue to puzzle over how communities preserved sanity in winters that stretched for months. Some argue rituals like singing, storytelling, and festivals served as mental medicine, staving off despair. Others suggest religious faith alone sustained people, giving hardship a framework of meaning. Yet others believe resilience was simply habit, a learned endurance passed from generation to generation. For you, none of these explanations feel complete. The truth seems to be that people clung to anything that gave them distraction, songs, jokes, prayers, or even petty quarrels. You notice how stories become lifelines. Each night, someone tells a tale of saints who braved snow barefoot, of hunters who tricked wolves, of summers so golden they seem like myths. Children listen wide-eyed, adults nod solemnly, everyone momentarily transported out of the frozen hut. Even you feel lighter, warmed by the cadence of words. It is not the fire that lifts you, it is narrative itself, a reminder that there are worlds beyond frost. Curious remedies for despair also appear in accounts. In some villages, people chewed on dried herbs thought to cheer the heart, like sage or mint stored from summer. Others brewed thin ale not for nourishment but for its mood-softening effects, dulling sharp edges of fear. Some communities encouraged singing in groups every morning, voices echoing against frozen walls, a routine as important as bread. Imagine standing in a smoky hall, shivering, yet raising your voice in song just to prove you still can. The sensory atmosphere of those moments is fragile. You hear voices crack, yet persistence carries them. You see faces light faintly in the glow of embers. You feel a hand squeeze your shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. These are the threads that keep minds from unraveling. And yet, not everyone endures. Records hint at suicides, of men wandering into blizzards to vanish, of women slipping quietly into frozen rivers. Chroniclers often cloak these stories in shame, but beneath the judgment is recognition. Winter broke some completely. To admit that truth is to acknowledge how heavy the season truly was. As you lie awake one night, staring at the rafters rimed with frost, you feel the weight pressing down. You fight it by recalling a summer day, the smell of hay, the hum of bees, the warmth on your skin. The memory is so vivid you almost feel heat again. This act of remembering is its own kind of medicine. In the morning, you rise sluggish, but you rise. You pull on stiff boots, wrap a frayed cloak, and step outside. The air bites, but the sky is faintly blue, a rare break in endless grey. A neighbour greets you, voice rough but steady. The exchange feels monumental, proof that conversation still exists, that life still holds. You walk to the woods, axe in hand, each step loud in the snow. Your breath clouds, your body aches, but you keep moving, not because you feel hopeful, but because movement itself is defiance. The frost can gnaw, the hunger can ache, the mind can sag, but if you keep walking, keep working, keep speaking, the season cannot fully claim you. That night, you share a story of your own by the fire. Not a grand tale, just a memory of summer fields. The children smile, the adults nod, and for a moment, silence lifts. The frost is still outside, waiting, but inside the hut, words glow like embers, proof that spirit can survive even the longest winter. You wake to the sound of axes striking wood, a rhythm that carries across the frozen fields like a heartbeat. Firewood is not just fuel here, it is currency, lifeline, and survival all in one. More than grain, more than cloth, it is wood that decides who will endure the winter and who will falter. You step outside, cloak wrapped tight, and see neighbours trudging back with sledges piled high with logs, their faces raw with frost and their arms trembling with fatigue. Medieval records remind us that winters often drained firewood reserves long before spring. Villagers relied on common forests, gathering branches, cutting trees, or scavenging brush. When those were gone, they turned to tearing down outbuildings, burning broken carts, even stripping bark for kindling. One manorial account from France records fines for peasants who dared poach in a lord's forest during a brutal freeze, though the alternative was freezing in their own huts. Imagine choosing between frostbite and punishment, knowing either could kill. The sensory details of gathering wood are harsh. You smell resin and damp bark sharp against the cold air. Your breath fogs heavily as you swing the axe, arms aching with each blow. Splinters sting your palms, sweat chills instantly on your back, and the echo of the strike seems swallowed by the snow. You drag branches across icy ground, each step a struggle, but without them the fire will die, and the hut will stiffen into silence. Odd strategies appear in the records. In Scandinavia, families burned dried peat when wood was scarce, the smoke thick and earthy, clinging to lungs. In alpine regions, some collected dung patties, dried hard in summer, stacked like bricks for winter fuel. The smell was pungent, acrid, but the warmth mattered more. One quirky tale mentions villagers boiling bones after feasts, not only for soup but for burning, their marrow grease sparking flames. Survival made even refuse precious. Scholars continue to debate whether medieval deforestation was driven primarily by cold winters or by long-term expansion. Some argue the climate crisis accelerated shortages, forcing people deeper into Lord's forests. Others believe demand from growing towns mattered more. Either way, peasants bore the brunt, trudging into woods under threat of frost and fines alike. Inside the hut, the fire is always the center. You hear it crackle faintly, feel its heat on your face even as your back remains chilled. Children press close, hands stretched out, cheeks glowing. Adults sit in a circle, tending embers as carefully as treasures. Ashes are not discarded but banked, covered each night so coals survive to morning. The ritual of firekeeping becomes sacred. To let it die is unthinkable, a failure that could cost lives. Curious customs surround this. Some households sprinkled salt into embers, believing it strengthened the fire's spirit. Others whispered blessings before stoking, asking the flame to last. In Germany, records mention families tossing their first bread crust of the year into the hearth, an offering for warmth. Imagine the faint smell of scorched bread mingling with wood smoke, the crackle as crumbs burn into sparks, the hope that a tiny gesture might persuade fire to stay. And still, shortages gnaw. You recall nights when fires burned low, embers glowing faintly, shadows stretching long across the walls, breath fogged inside huts, blankets stiff with frost. Families huddled closer, children wrapped like parcels in rags, their shivers muffled by the weight of their parents' arms. The silence was punctuated only by the crack of timber outside, trees splitting in the cold, mocking those who had no axes to claim them. There are strange moments of irony. In towns, some wealthier households burned imported coal, the smell sulphurous, choking neighbors unused to it. Chroniclers complain of black smoke darkening the air, yet note that those families endured the cold better than those relying only on dwindling wood. Change was already stirring, even if peasants still clung to forests and brush. You feel it in your body when firewood is scarce. Fingers numb despite mittens, joints stiff, lips cracked until they bleed. Sleep becomes impossible in freezing air, dreams broken by shivers. Hunger is cruel, but cold is relentless, a constant enemy gnawing at every breath. You realize that every log tossed on the fire is both triumph and loss, a gift of warmth today, but a debt owed to tomorrow. One evening, you sit by the hearth, the fire sputtering low. The pot above it simmers faintly, filled with nettle soup. The smell is thin but comforting, blending with the smoke that stings your eyes. You watch as your neighbor tosses his last log into the flames, face set, knowing tomorrow he must venture into the Lord's woods or burn his fence. The glow warms everyone for now, faces softening, children sighing in relief. But beneath it lies the question: what happens when there is nothing left to burn? The fire crackles, sparks drift upward, and you close your eyes, leaning closer. For tonight at least, the hut is warm. Tomorrow will demand more wood, more labor, more desperate searches through snowy woods. But tonight, you bask in the brief triumph of flame, fragile yet fierce, holding back winter for one more night. The village is quiet, almost reverent, as dawn breaks over another frozen morning. The air carries no birdsong, only the creak of trees splintering under ice. You trudge toward the churchyard, following a procession of villagers wrapped in cloaks patched too many times to count. Today is not a feast, nor a fair, nor even a court gathering. It is a burial, and the ground itself resists the task. Men with axes and picks strike at the earth, their blows ringing like iron against stone. Frost has hardened the soil into something less like dirt and more like rock. Each swing sends shards of frozen earth scattering, each strike echoing through the still air. The corpse lies nearby, wrapped in linen, stiff as wood, waiting for a place in the ground. Children watch silently, their breath puffing white, their eyes wide. Even in youth, they know winter claims its toll. Medieval chronicles often note the difficulty of winter burials. In Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, frozen ground could not be pierced at all, forcing families to keep bodies in barns or chapels until thaw. In England, some parishes built charnel houses where corpses were stacked until spring. Imagine walking past such a house, the smell clinging even in the cold, a grim reminder that the earth had closed its door. Here, the villagers persist. The sound of axes is steady. The men's faces red with effort. Sweat steams on their brows, freezing almost instantly on beards. The smell of soil rises faintly when a layer finally cracks, earthy and cold, mingling with the ever-present smoke from nearby chimneys. It takes hours, but at last, a pit deep enough yawns open. The body is lowered in, prayers murmured, earth scraped back with stiff fingers. The grave looks shallow, but it is the best they can do. Curious customs appear in accounts of these burials. Some families placed candles at the head of the grave to keep frost demons from disturbing the rest. Others scattered herbs, sage, thyme, or juniper, believing their scent would mask decay until spring. One record from Bavaria mentions placing coins not only for the soul's journey, but to bribe the frozen earth to hold him kindly. Small gestures, born from desperation, yet deeply human. Scholars have long debated whether winter mortality truly spiked during the harshest freezes, or whether chroniclers exaggerated for drama. Some argue that famine and disease, not frost itself, filled graveyards. Others counter that the sheer struggle of digging graves shows how frequent deaths were. For you, standing here with numb fingers and aching arms, the argument is abstract. The body in the ground is proof enough. The sensory world presses in. You hear the dull thud of earth on linen as soil is shoveled back. You smell the mingling of frozen dirt and tallow candles burning faintly nearby. You feel the sting of cold against your cheeks, the numbness of your toes inside stiff boots. You see faces drawn with hunger, lips moving in prayer, eyes glancing upward as though heaven might relent. And yet, amid the grief, there is also solidarity. Villagers share the burden of digging, of praying, of covering the grave. No one family endures this alone. The community bends together under the weight of death. The burial becomes not just a farewell but an act of defiance, proof that even in the cruelest season, rituals endure. When the service ends, people shuffle back to their huts, breath fogging in the pale air. The graveyard stands silent again, mounds of snow marking the season's toll. The church bell, frozen weeks ago, tolls faintly now, its sound dull but steady, rolling across the valley. It is not a triumphant peal, but a weary voice, acknowledging loss. That night, you lie by the hearth, fire crackling low. The day has left you heavy, but also strangely resolved. You think of the shallow grave, of the prayers whispered into cold air, of the candles guttering in the snow. Winter takes, but it does not erase. Memory endures, rituals endure, the community endures. The frost will not last forever. Already, you sense days lengthening, the light returning fraction by fraction. Beneath the snow, seeds lie waiting. Beneath the ice, rivers still flow. Beneath grief, life persists. You close your eyes with that thought, knowing spring is still distant, but certain it will come. And so ends your long walk through the harshest winters of medieval times. You have trudged across frozen rivers, huddled in smoky huts, faced wolves in the night, and buried neighbors in unyielding ground. You have felt hunger bite, fires fail, and despair press heavy. But you have also seen resilient children laughing in snow, couples dancing in barns, monks scratching ink into parchment, villagers singing under candlelight. The story lingers with you as you drift towards sleep. Winter was cruel, but people were stubborn. They endured, not through comfort but through persistence, weaving warmth out of scraps of wood, scraps of food, scraps of hope, and in their endurance, you find your own. Now, as the journey closes, let your breath slow. Picture the snow outside, muffling sound, softening edges, blanketing the earth in silence. The cold is no longer an enemy here, it is a quilt, heavy but protective, urging you to rest. The fire in the hearth burns low, embers glowing red like sleepy eyes, shadows stretching long and gentle across the walls. You lie beneath rough blankets, but in imagination they feel softer, heavier, wrapping you in warmth. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, comforting now instead of sharp. Each crackle of the fire is like a lullaby, steady, soothing, a reminder that the flame endures even in deep winter. Outside, the stars wheel slowly across the sky, constellations steady above frozen fields. They are ancient witnesses, the same lights seen by villagers centuries ago. Imagine their cold gleam not as distant, but as reassuring proof that the world continues, that the seasons turn, that spring will follow, no matter how endless the frost seems tonight. Let yourself drift into that rhythm. Each inhale draws in calm, each exhale releases the weight of struggle. You are safe, wrapped in history's embrace, warmed by the resilience of those who came before. Their stories flicker like candles in the dark, not fierce but steady, enough to light your path toward rest. The wind outside may still rattle shutters, but within your mind, the storm quiets, the frost recedes, the hunger fades, and only peace remains. Allow sleep to come like thaw in spring, slow, gentle, inevitable. Sweet dreams.